Welcome to our YouTube channel. Hi guys, tonight we are stepping back into a world without switches, thermostats or central heating, humming quietly behind the walls. You find yourself in a medieval village. The air thick, with the smell of wood smoke and damp earth. A faint mist curls between the thatched cottages and every sound seems muffled by the cold. You can almost feel the frost biting at your fingertips already. If you were one of the peasants who lived here, wrapped in coarse wool and hoping the fire doesn't die before morning, well, let's just say you probably wouldn't survive the week without help. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here and tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you now. Dim the lights. You trudge down a muddy lane, boots sinking into the frozen ruts. The cottages seem small, half swallowed by the earth, as if huddling for warmth. Smoke curls weakly from low holes in the roofs. Inside someone coughs and the faint sound of a baby crying filters through a thin wooden door. You lift the latch and step into a peasant home around the year 1300. The first thing you notice is the smell: wood smoke, damp straw, old wool and something faintly sour. The air is thick enough to taste. The single room is dim, smoky and small, yet it is the entire world for the family who lives here. The floor is packed earth, the walls are a patchwork of sticks and mud and the roof droops under bundles of thatch. A single fire pit smolders in the center of the room, glowing faintly like the last heartbeat of summer. This is warmth, but only barely. You look around and realize there is no chimney. The smoke from the fire gathers in heavy clouds near the ceiling before escaping through a hole in the roof. Your eyes sting, and you cough as you try to see through it. The family sits close together around the fire, faces ruddy from heat on one side, pale from cold on the other. The children's clothes are made of rough spun wool, patched over and over again. One of them clutches a piece of stale bread, chewing slowly, as if trying to stretch warmth from it. You sit near the hearth, feeling the ground still cold beneath you. The fire's warmth fades quickly into the air, but it is life itself here. Without it, the night would be deadly. You can almost hear the winter outside whispering through the cracks in the walls. The mother stirs a pot that hangs over the flames. Its contents a thin pottage of barley turnip and maybe a scrap of salted pork if the family is lucky this week. This was the peasant's world before central heating. Heat was precious, scarce and earned with sweat and smoke. The walls of these homes were made from what was available nearby: sticks, mud, straw and sometimes animal dung, mixed and pressed between wooden frames. It was cheap, quick to make and surprisingly strong, but not particularly warm. The wind always found its way in. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants truly suffered constant cold or if they simply adapted to it, living in a state where discomfort was as ordinary as daylight. The houses themselves were small for a reason. Smaller rooms were easier to heat, even with a weak fire. Many cottages were built half into the ground to catch the earth's natural insulation. You can feel it now, the cold seeping from below, but the wind kept out above. The walls are rough beneath your hand, the texture of dried mud studded with straw. When the fire crackles, you can hear tiny bits of plaster crumble off, falling like dry leaves. One mainstream fact you recall is that by the 13th century, most peasants in Western Europe lived in such one-room cottages shared by an entire family and often a few animals. The single hearth served for cooking, light and warmth all at once. There was no privacy, no separate kitchen or parlor, just one smoky living core. Yet life pulsed here. The hearth was the heart, both literally and symbolically. Even the word hearth shares roots with heart in several old languages. There is a curious little tidbit about how some peasants would hang their clothing and even small tools in the rafters to dry them in the smoky warmth. Over time the soot would coat everything black, preserving the wood and sometimes even discouraging pests. The roof beams might last for centuries thanks to that layer of grime. So when you think of medieval filth, it wasn't always a sign of neglect. It could be protection in disguise. You shift a little closer to the fire, watching the flicker of light dance across the packed earth floor. The fire pit is surrounded by stones blackened with years of use. Besides it sits a rough clay pot, cracked and mended with wire. You can almost feel the rhythm of life here, the chores, the small talk, the nightly prayers whispered in smoke. Outside, the cold deepens. Inside, the family's laughter is quiet but steady, fragile warmth against the long winter. The flickering glow illuminates their faces. There is a tenderness here that surprises you. They know the cold could kill them, yet they make room for stories, songs, and comfort. The father pokes the fire with a stick, sending sparks upward into the smoky dark. Somewhere in that orange haze lies the same feeling you get watching a candle in your living room, safe and distant from the frost outside. You wonder for a moment what it must have been like to wake up before dawn in a house like this, the embers nearly dead, your breath clouding. In front of your face, to reach for a frozen jug of water and find ice forming inside it, to put on stiff, cold clothes and start the fire again with trembling hands. And yet you would every morning, because to stop meant death. This was not a life of comfort but of endurance, of knowing every sound the fire made, every scent of burning wood and every sign that warmth was fading. And yet, despite all of it, there was a kind of peace here, a rhythm of survival that humans knew for centuries. The cold shaped not just their bodies but their minds, teaching patience, thrift and deep respect for flame. Outside, snow begins to fall, silent and slow. You feel it in your bones, that timeless chill that once ruled human life. You listen to the faint hum of the wind through the thatch and realize that the people in this tiny, smoky home lived closer to nature than most of us ever will. Their fires were small, their nights long, but in those embers glowed everything they knew of safety. You stretch your legs toward the warmth, the rough wool scratching your skin. The fire pops softly, somewhere in the rafters, a mouse stirs and as your eyes grow heavy, you start to feel what they must have felt, a fragile balance between comfort and cold, survival and sleep. Frost thickens overnight, spreading across the ground like spilled glass. When you wake, your breath floats in the air, visible even indoors. The fire that once glowed warmly has slumped into a few dull embers, barely alive. You reach out with a stick stirring the ash, until one tiny orange eye blinks open around you. The room is gray and still. The sound of the wind outside is steady and low, like a long sigh. This is winter's first bite, and you feel it settle deep into your bones. You pull your rough cloak tighter and step toward the doorway, careful not to wake the family still bundled in the dark. When you open the door, the cold rushes in like an animal, fierce and alive. The air smells of frost and smoke. The entire village seems frozen in place, each cottage dusted white, each roof heavy under the weight of snow. Before central heating, homes were constant battles between human warmth and nature's endless chill. Peasants depended on what little insulation their walls could offer. These walls were built not for comfort but survival. Packed with mud, straw and branches, they held structure better than heat. You can touch them and feel how quickly the cold seeps through, making the inside air only slightly warmer than the outside. Historians still debate whether peasants truly suffered freezing homes or if their bodies simply adapted. Some argue that generations of living in such cold gave people thicker blood, stronger circulation and a tolerance modern humans can barely imagine. Others believe that misery was simply the background hum of daily life, so constant that no one thought to complain. You picture yourself living here for years, never truly warm, yet still somehow alive, still working, still laughing inside. The layout of the house does not help much. There are no hallways, no rooms to close off. Heat from the fire rises straight up and out, leaving the lower half of the room chilled. The stone or clay walls hold the cold like a sponge. You can feel it in your fingertips as you brush the rough surface. Medieval builders sometimes mixed animal hair or horse dung into the mud to strengthen it, and while it sounds unpleasant, it did make the walls slightly less porous. There is a simple truth that warmth was always fleeting. The fire might warm the surrounding space, but a few steps away you would already be cold again in the corners of the cottage. Frost could actually form on the inside of the walls. During the harshest winters, to sit too far from the hearth meant numb fingers, numb toes, and eventually a dangerous chill that no blanket could chase away. A curious tidbit: some peasants in particularly cold regions like Scandinavia would seal up the smallest cracks in their walls with moss or even animal fat. It was primitive insulation, but it worked surprisingly well. You can imagine scraping lichen and moss from trees, pressing it into the gaps, your fingers stiff from cold but determined to block the wind. The earthy smell would linger all winter long, a quiet reminder of the forest that helped you survive. The average indoor temperature in winter might hover around 5 to 10 degrees Celsius, maybe less during bad years. You breathe deeply, feeling the cold settle in your chest. Imagine sleeping in that, working in that, eating in that day after day. When warmth is so rare, every small improvement feels miraculous. A thicker cloak, a better roof, a few extra logs, all of it means comfort. When you step outside again, you hear the faint crackle of frost beneath your boots. The trees beyond the village are bare and gray, their branches clawing at a pale sky. Somewhere in the distance a dog barks, then falls silent. The quiet feels endless, almost holy. Yet for the peasants who lived through it, this season was not a time for reflection but survival. Every hour of daylight mattered. Every scrap of fuel had to be stretched carefully. You glance back at the row of cottages. Smoke curls thinly from roof vents, showing that other families have stirred their fires to life. A few villagers emerge, faces red from cold, carrying bundles of sticks. One man coughs harshly, his breath, leaving clouds in the air. You nod to him and move on, crunching over snow toward the edge of the settlement. The land itself looks asleep, but in truth it is alive in a quieter way. Beneath the frozen soil lie the roots and seeds that will return when spring comes. The peasants know this. Their rhythm follows the earth's, slow and patient. They accept that warmth and cold are part of the same cycle. In a way, the cold teaches humility, reminds them that nature always wins, but sometimes allows mercy. You stop beside a small hut where a woman is patching the thatch roof. Her hands are bare, despite the weather. She hums quietly a tune that seems older than words. Her movements are practiced, gathering handfuls of straw, binding them with twine, pressing them into the roof's weave. Each action is deliberate, conserving warmth a few precious degrees at a time. She looks at you briefly, smiles faintly, and continues. The cold creeps into everything. The wood of the door frames cracks, the leather of shoes stiffens, and even metal tools feel cruel to the touch. The fire inside the cottage has to burn constantly because, if it dies, restarting it in this cold is an ordeal. Some families keep embers alive overnight by burying them in ashes, insulating them so they can be revived in the morning. Losing your fire was more than inconvenience, it was disaster. You remember how, last night, the family huddled together by the fire. They will do the same tonight and the night after. Until spring, they will seal the door as best they can, hang cloth over the gaps and pray that the wind does not change. The air will still taste of smoke, but that is the flavor of life. As you stand outside watching the pale sun rise over the snowy hills, you begin to feel the odd beauty in all of this, the quiet rhythm of the seasons, the smallness of the cottages against the landscape, the soft glow of fires in the distance. All of it carries a strange peace. The peasants did not have warmth as we do, but they had something else, an intimacy with their environment that modern comfort often replaces with forgetfulness. You close your eyes for a moment. You can feel the bite of the cold on your cheeks, hear the faint hiss of snow falling on thatch, smell the smoke of wood mixed with damp air. Somewhere in that sensory haze is a lesson that warmth, when it finally comes, means more. After the frost, the fire crackles back to life, a dim red glow spreading across the hearth like the slow beating of a tired heart. You crouch closer, hands extended, feeling the warmth seep into your fingers. Smoke curls up into the dark rafters, and you realize this faint, flickering light is the center of everything. Without it, the home is only shadow and frost. This small hearth is the pulse of the household, its warmth the measure of life itself. In most peasant cottages there was only one fire. It was used for cooking, drying clothes, providing light and, most of all, keeping everyone from freezing. The hearth was not a luxury, it was survival made visible. Evidence from the period suggests that by the early Middle Ages every family, no matter how poor, tried to keep at least a small fire going through winter. Losing it meant more than cold. It meant begging your neighbor for embers or venturing out to find dry wood when everything outside was frozen stiff. You can almost hear the soft rhythm of daily life around this fire. The mother stirs a pot hanging from a blackened iron hook, the father repairs a wooden yoke, hands steady despite the chill. The children sit close, whispering and giggling, while they toast bits of stale bread on sticks. The fire light paints their faces gold, and for a moment you forget how harsh the world outside really is. One curious practice worth mentioning is that peasants sometimes burned dried cow dung when wood was scarce. It sounds unpleasant, but it produced a steady heat and little flame. The smell was sharp, earthy, and clung to everything. Yet people grew used to it. In some regions, dung mixed with straw was shaped into bricks and stacked neatly beside the hearth. As precious as logs. Heat, no matter the source, was worth enduring almost anything. As you watch the smoke twist upward, you notice, there is no chimney. The fire sits in an open pit on the floor with a hole above it in the roof. The smoke rises unevenly, gathering in thick layers before it finds its way out. The air burns your eyes, your throat feels raw, and your clothes soon smell like the hearth itself. Contemporary accounts reveal that it was common for people to live half-blind in winter from constant smoke irritation. But without it the cottage would lose its fragile warmth. Not all historians see eye to eye on how smoky these houses truly were. Some believe the open hearth design actually helped preserve meat and thatch, while others argue that constant exposure to smoke must have caused severe respiratory illness. The truth probably lies somewhere between the two. The smoke was both a curse and a form of preservation, deterring insects and drying the interior. You can almost feel how strange that balance must have been to live in a world where even discomfort served a purpose. The hearth also shaped the rhythm of family life. Everyone gathered around it, not just for heat but for light. After sunset, the fire's glow was the only illumination. It became the evening stage where stories were told, tools were mended and prayers whispered. The hearth marked time as surely as church bells. When the flames dimmed, the day ended. The walls nearest the hearth are blackened, shiny with years of soot. You run your fingers along them and feel the grease of smoke baked into the plaster. That sheen was almost like armor, protecting the fragile wee and dorm from moisture. In a strange way, the fire's damage also kept the house alive. It was a relationship of mutual necessity, each feeding and wearing down the other. The medieval mind held fire in deep reverence. It was seen as both holy and dangerous, a living spirit that could bless or destroy. Villagers might toss salt or herbs into the flames for protection or whisper a quick charm before rekindling it. There are old tales of hearth spirits, small, unseen beings who guarded the fire as long as it was respected. Letting the fire die without prayer was thought to offend them. In a world of biting cold, superstition and warmth shared the same breath. You glance up toward the rafters where bundles of herbs hang, drying in the smoky air, sage, rosemary, and thyme. They add a faint sweetness to the heavy scent of burning oak. The smoke preserves them, and in turn they lend the air a kind of healing fragrance. The interplay of aroma, heat and sound feels ancient, eternal. You can picture nights here, snow whispering outside, wind pressing against the walls, the fire's glow, the only defiance against darkness. The children fall asleep one by one, their faces turned toward the embers. The adults sit quietly, maybe too tired to talk. The fire shrinks, becoming a deep red pool of light, like a heartbeat fading into sleep. This tiny hearth, this simple pit of ash and stone, was humanity's first furnace, kitchen and comforter. Every civilization begins around fire, and even now you feel its hypnotic pull. The peasants of medieval Europe might not have known anything of radiators or boilers, but they understood warmth at its most primal. The irony, of course, is that their hearths heated only a small circle, leaving the rest of the home in shadow. Yet that circle was enough. It was where life gathered, where laughter echoed and where stories of saints, kings and miracles filled the smoky air. You poked the fire one last time. Sparks rise and vanish into the roof hole, each one a tiny reminder of all the winters endured before you were ever born. Outside, frost still waits. Inside, the hearth whispers, for now at least, you are safe. The smoke thickens until your eyes sting again. You squint through the haze and see how it drifts lazily around the room before escaping through the hole in the thatched roof. It curls and twists like a ghost, carrying with it the smell of wood, damp earth, and cooked grain. You blink, cough softly and begin to understand why life around a medieval hearth was as much about endurance as comfort. The houses of the poor did not have chimneys for most of the Middle Ages. The open hearth was the fire's throne set directly on the floor of the single room, usually near the center. The smoke had only one way out, through the door or that small gap in the roof. This made the entire cottage a cloud of fumes. The upper half of the room was often black with soot, and even the rafters gleamed with tar and smoke residue. Evidence from old building remains shows that many roofs were replaced regularly because they simply rotted from decades of exposure. You can imagine the sound of coughing inside such a home. Children's voices crack as they grow used to the air. The old ones wee in their sleep. The smoke seeps into hair, clothes and lungs. It clings to everything. Yet, as unpleasant as it seems, it provided a strange kind of protection. The thick smoke killed insects, preserved food, hung high in the rafters and even helped cure the thatch against rain. So while it was suffocating, it also saved lives in quiet, invisible ways. One curious practice worth remembering is that some families used the smoke itself to age their food. Bacon, fish or sausages were hung from beams above the fire to dry and absorb the fumes. Over time the smoky layer acted like a barrier against spoilage. The process turned necessity into cuisine, a kind of accidental medieval smoked meat. Imagine that scent filling the house, a mixture of oak, sweat and salt. It was harsh but strangely appetizing. Medieval people knew that life was balance. Too much smoke meant coughing, but too little could invite insects, mold and rot. Some experts still question whether families intentionally designed their homes to trap a certain level of smoke or if it was simply unavoidable. Perhaps they learned to live with it the way we live, with the hum of traffic or the glow of screens unpleasant at first, then unnoticed over time. You glance upward again. Light filters weakly through the smoke hole, a single pale beam touching the fire below. It is strange to think that this hole was the only window to the sky in many homes. Rain often leaked through and snow could drift down onto the floor during winter nights. Yet without it the house would have been unlivable. You can picture the housewife tending her pot of stew, stirring with one hand while waving away the smoke with the other, her eyes watering, her apron smudged black. The scent of burning wood becomes part of life's rhythm. People smelled constantly of smoke, and visitors could tell what kind of fuel a family burned simply by the odor that followed them. Peat, dung or oak, each had its own signature. In some regions, villagers joked that a person's social rank could be guessed from their smell. Lords of the manor had perfumes and spices. Peasants had woods, smoke and sweat. As you move closer to the wall, you notice how dark it is. Near the roof, the soot forms patterns like strange black feathers. If you look long enough, it almost seems alive. The ceiling feels lower, pressing down on you, and your throat begins to burn. You understand why peasants sometimes spent time outdoors, even in freezing weather. Fresh air was a relief. Yet the moment you step outside, the cold bites so sharply that you almost long for the smoky warmth again. Inside these walls, the family must constantly adjust the fire to balance heat and smoke. Too much fuel and the smoke thickens, too little and the flame dies. It takes skill, patience and instinct. You can imagine a father teaching his son how to read the behavior of the smoke, to know when to open the door for a gust or when to let it settle. Such knowledge was passed through generations, unwritten but essential. An odd little detail you might enjoy is that people sometimes used long poles tipped with feathers or cloth to push smoke upward and stir the air. It was a medieval version of a fan, improvised but clever. Others hung herbs from the rafters to mask the odor, letting sage or lavender mingle with the acrid scent of soot. These were small gestures of comfort in a world that rarely offered any. Not all chroniclers agreed on how people tolerated such air. Some accounts describe the cottages as dens of darkness, while others write of them with affection, calling them warm and lively hearts. The truth is likely both. To the outsider they were suffocating, to the people inside, they were home. You settle again by the fire blinking through the haze. Your skin feels coated with fine dust. The air hums with the constant crackle of wood and the faint whistle of wind through the roof. You can almost sense how the peasants adjusted their breathing to the rhythm of smoke, how they spoke softly to save their voices. Their lives were shaped by this element, its warmth, its danger, its stubborn presence. Even their health revolved around it. Chronic coughing, eye irritation and lung infections were common, though no one called them diseases. They were simply part of life. Yet people lived long enough to raise children, tend fields and tell stories beside that same smoke. Endurance, not comfort, was the measure of survival. The fire flares for a moment, bright enough to push the smoke higher. You look up and see it thinning toward the opening in the roof, a pale ribbon of light escaping into the morning sky. It feels like a small victory, one the peasants must have celebrated daily, without even realizing. You breathe in slowly, eyes half closed, feeling the sting and the warmth together. This is what life was before chimneys, before vents and flue and warmth. At the twist of a dial, the smoke was both enemy and friend, teaching people how to live in harmony with what hurt them. You can almost imagine the sigh of relief that must have come centuries later when the first chimney rose through a roof and carried the smoke away for good. The morning sun creeps through the smoke hole, brushing the wall with a faint golden light. You move closer and trace the surface with your fingertips. It feels uneven, cool and gritty. This is wee and dorm, the skin of medieval life. The wall breathes faintly, smelling of earth and straw holding together through patience and luck. To a modern eye it looks fragile, almost temporary, yet it has stood through wind and snow for years. WL and dorm was the heart of peasant architecture. Builders WO flexible sticks, called wattles, into a loose latten between wooden beams. Then they covered it with a mixture of mud, straw, clay and sometimes animal dung. Once dried, it hardened into a surprisingly sturdy surface. Records from the time suggest this humble method could last decades if maintained. It was cheap, light and easy to repair. The peasants who built with it understood their materials the way a baker understands dough. They could tell by touch when the mud was too wet or the straw too short. You crouched to look closer. The dried mud still shows the fingerprints of whoever shaped it. Perhaps the hands were small, maybe a woman or an older child helping build their family's home. You can imagine the rhythm of it, slap, press, smooth, repeat. There is an intimacy in this kind of work, a connection between body and shelter that modern construction rarely offers. A small, often overlooked fact here is that animal dung was not just filler. It acted as a natural binder, strengthening the mix and helping it resist cracking. The smell faded quickly, leaving only a faint earthy scent. Some villagers even added bits of hair or crushed shells to improve the texture. To them the wall was alive, something that needed tending and patching like a garden. Not all experts agree on how effective these walls were at keeping out the cold. Some claim we and door provided decent insulation if the cracks were sealed and the structure well maintained. Others insist it trapped dampness and made homes clammy. The truth seems to depend on local skill and weather. In drier climates the walls held heat. In wet regions they soaked it up like a sponge. Either way the peasants made you step back to see the full wall. The light plays over the straw fibers embedded in the mud, giving it a soft golden hue. When the fire light flickers, the surface almost seems to move, as though the house itself is breathing. You can picture children running their hands along it, tracing the bumps and ridges like patterns on skin. The wall was not just structure. It was the memory of work and weather, a living archive of touch. Occasionally, wealthier villagers or craftsmen whitewashed their walls with lime plaster. This gave them a cleaner appearance and helped reflect light from the hearth. But the coating had another benefit: it acted as a mild disinfectant, killing insects and bacteria. Chronicles from certain monasteries mentioned lime washing as a spiritual act, a way to purify both the home and the soul. You can imagine peasants copying the habit in smaller, humbler ways. A peculiar little custom appears in some old villages where families pressed small tokens or carvings into fresh doorbells across a circle, or even a handprint were buried inside the walls to guard against evil spirits. Sometimes builders found these, centuries later, still hidden, their meanings long forgotten. You can almost feel the superstition mixed with practicality in that gesture. Protection built into the very clay that kept out the wind. Inside the house, the walls, imperfections catch the light in soft, irregular waves. Each lump and crack tells a story of repair after a storm or a child's careless bump. The people who lived here never thought of perfection as something smooth or uniform. They valued strength, not symmetry. The wall might crumble a little each winter, but by spring new mud would fill the gaps. The home was never finished, only cared for. There is a kind of peace in that philosophy. You think about how everything in modern life is built to last without touch, while here survival meant constant contact, patching, stirring, shaping, feeling. Every inch of the home bore the mark of its makers, even the imperfections were reminders of persistence. You press your palm flat against the surface. The wall holds the chill of night, but beneath it lies warmth from the hearth's lingering heat. It feels alive, a blend of cold and memory. You wonder how many winters this structure has endured, how many storms rattled its frame, while families inside pressed closer together whispering that the walls would hold somewhere. Outside you hear the creak of wooden wheels and the call of a man leading an ox. The sound filters through the wee and dorm like a faint echo. The walls do not silence the world, they soften it. Inside, everything feels close and muted. Even the wind becomes a sigh instead of a roar. An image comes to mind, a peasant woman in mid-winter kneeling beside a cracked patch of wall, mixing mud and straw in a bucket, with bare hands repairing her home by touch. Her movements are slow, practiced, almost meditative. She hums softly as she works. The children nearby gather straw for her, and the smell of earth and smoke blends into the quiet rhythm of survival. That was daily life before central heating, a constant, tender negotiation with the elements. The house was not an escape from nature, but a conversation with it. Every surface bore proof of that dialogue, smoke above mud below straw and wood. Between you, lean your shoulder against the wall and feel its quiet sturdiness. It holds more than warmth. It holds centuries of human persistence. The same hands that sowed seed and milked cows also built shelter from soil and straw. The same patience that endured hunger built walls thick enough to endure winter. The fire behind you crackles softly, sending a glow that dances across the wee's uneven face. You feel both the fragility and strength of it, how something so simple could cradle life through the coldest nights. You take a step away from the wall and look down beneath your feet. The floor is not made of stone or wood, but of earth, compacted and uneven, dusted with ash and straw. It feels cool and gritty under your soles. When you shift your weight, the surface gives slightly, releasing a faint scent of soil and smoke. This is where daily life unfolds, where crumbs, tears and embers all fall to the same place. In a medieval peasant's home, floors were usually made of packed dirt, known as a beaten earth floor. Contemporary accounts describe them as dark, rough and alive with the smell of the land. People would sweep them, often with birch brooms, but dust always returned. Over time, the surface hardened like clay from constant foot traffic, becoming smooth where people walked most and rough where they didn't. It was both floor and ground, a reminder that the line between house and world was thin. To keep the surface from turning to mud during wet seasons, peasants covered it with rushes, reeds or straw. These were replaced a few times a year, though not nearly as often as one might hope. Chronicles from the period mention the stench that developed when the old layers were left too long, hiding scraps of food, insects and waste. Still, to the peasants, this was comfort. The rushes offered a cushion against the cold earth, a faint rustle underfoot that reminded them of fields in summer. An interesting practice described in village records is the sprinkling of herbs or flowers among the rushes. Lavender, mint and margaret were popular choices. When available, they did not only perfume the air but also helped deter fleas and mice. Imagine the scent rising faintly whenever someone stepped across the floor, mingling with wood, smoke and cooking smells. The home became its own kind of incense. Not all scholars agree on how filthy these rush-strewn floors truly were. Some insist that the image of medieval squalor is exaggerated by later writers seeking to highlight their own progress. Others point to archaeological evidence showing layers of decomposed vegetation several inches thick in some homes. Perhaps it depended on the family, the season and the strength of the hearth fire. In any case, life was a compromise between warmth and cleanliness. You crouched to study the texture of the floor. The straw fibers are pressed into the earth, forming a pattern like faded parchment. You picture a woman scattering fresh rushes after the harvest, laughing as her children chase the pieces through the air. For a moment, the act must have felt festive, a renewal of space. The family might even have said a short blessing, as they did it, thanking the earth for both crops and comfort. One curious detail hidden in some records is that ashes from the hearth were often spread across the floor to absorb moisture. Ash was a natural drying agent and, when mixed with soil, helped create a smoother, firmer surface. Over years, it formed layers that trapped traces of daily life, bits of pottery, a child's tooth or a pin lost in the rushes. Archaeologists today read these layers like pages of a diary, piecing together how people lived and moved in their small, smoky worlds. The floor was not only for walking. It was where people sat to mend clothes, shell pies, or weave baskets. Children played here and sometimes animals rested close to the door. You can almost see it now, a chicken scratching near the threshold, a cat curled near the fire pit, a child drawing shapes in the dust with a stick. The floor was alive with movement, both human and animal. At night, when the fire dimmed, the rushes muffled sound, creating a hushed atmosphere. The soft rustling must have blended with the crackle of the last embers and the distant howl of wind. Outside it was not silence but a kind of living quiet. Every sound had texture, the whisper of straw, the sigh of ash, the faint click of cooling embers. Sometimes peasants hardened sections of the floor with a mixture of animal blood and clay. It sounds grim, but it created a surface resistant to wear and water. Over time the color darkened to a rich brown, polished by generations of bare feet. You imagine how it might have gleamed faintly in firelight, a handmade kind of beauty rising from necessity. The earth floor also carried a deeper symbolism. To live close to the soil, meant to live close to God's creation. Medieval sermons often reminded peasants that from dust you came and to dust you shall return. For them, it was not a poetic phrase, but a daily truth felt through the soles of their feet. The ground beneath their homes was the same that grew their food and received their dead. Every step carried that quiet reminder of life's cycle. Over time, the smell of the floor became part of what home meant, damp after rain, warm and dusty in summer, smoky near the hearth. It changed with the weather and told stories. No one needed to speak aloud. If the air smelled too wet, it meant the roof was leaking. If it smelled burnt, the fire had flared too high. The earth itself was a kind of messenger. You brush your hand over the dirt and watch a few does of dust drift upward. They shimmer briefly in the light from the roof hole, turning golden before disappearing into shadow. This is what history feels like up close, quiet, textured, patient. The peasants did not build grand monuments, but every packed handful of soil underfoot carried their persistence. When you stand again, your feet are dusty, your fingers marked with a thin film of ash. Yet you feel strangely grounded. The simplicity of the floor, its raw honesty, speaks of endurance more than poverty. It reminds you that comfort has always been a matter of degree, and even the roughest surface can hold a kind of grace when seen by firelight. The wind softens outside, and you look up toward the thatched roof above your head. It dips slightly at the center, its golden edges, catching the weak light that filters through the smoke hole. At first glance it looks almost cozy, like the roof of a storybook cottage, but the closer you look, the more you notice how alive it seems. You hear faint rustling above the rafters, a quick scurry of tiny claws, and realize that the thatched shelters, far more than the people below thatched roofs, were the hallmark of medieval rural life. Made from bundles of straw, reeds, or heather, they were bound tightly and layered thick to repel rain. Historical evidence suggests that with proper care, a good thatch could last 2 or 3 decades, sometimes longer. But maintenance was everything. The peasants who lived beneath these roofs knew how to replace sections each year, weaving in fresh straw, like tailor mending a beloved coat. You reach up to touch one of the low beams. It feels rough, flecked with soot and cobwebs. The rafters were often cut from young trees, still slightly curved, giving the roof its gentle slope. Between them, the straw is packed so densely that you can almost hear the soft sigh of trapped air when the wind passes over it. In winter, this air acted as insulation, holding warmth inside. In summer, it kept the sun's heat out. The design was simple but ingenious, shaped by centuries of trial and error. An odd little custom recorded in old village notes describes how families place charms inside the thatch for protection. It might be a carved wooden cross, a scrap of cloth, or even a dead weasel to ward off vermin. To modern minds it sounds absurd, but to them the roof was sacred space. It was the line between the human world and the unpredictable heavens. Not all historians agree on how effective thatch truly was at keeping out weather. Some argue that well-made roofs were nearly waterproof, while others insist they leaked constantly during storms. Perhaps both are true. A carefully laid roof by skilled hands might have held firm through a season of rain, but a poorly done one could drip cold water onto sleeping faces. All night. You can imagine the soft link of droplets landing in wooden bowls, the smell of damp straw mixing with smoke. At night the roof comes alive. Tiny feet scratch across the thatch, the sounds of mice, birds, or even insects nesting between the layers. The peasants heard it all without alarm. These creatures were simply part of life. Sometimes children would toss pebbles or shout to scare them off, laughing as the noise scattered. But the intruders always returned. The warmth and dryness of the roof were too inviting to resist. In some regions, owls became unexpected housemates. They nested in the eaves, feeding on the same mice that bothered the humans, below a strange partnership, but one that worked. People even saw owls as lucky, their calls believed to guard against spirits that prowled the night. You can imagine lying awake under the roof, hearing the soft hoot outside and feeling strangely reassured from inside. The thatch glows golden where the fire light catches it. You can see strands quivering slightly as the wind moves through the layers. The smell is dry and sweet, tinged with smoke. Every few weeks someone must climb onto the roof to fix sagging patches or replace rotted cords. It was dangerous work, especially in winter when frost made the surface slippery. Yet the task was done without complaint, as ordinary as milking a cow. One charmingly peculiar habit of the age was storing herbs and onions in the thatch. They dried slowly from the warmth of the house, safe from animals. Some families even tucked precious belongings up their spare coins, tools or keepsakes, trusting that no thief would think to search above the hearth. When modern restorers find these hidden items, they feel like small-time capsules of hope, little acts of faith in continuity. You tilt your head studying the angles of the roof. Despite its roughness, it has a natural beauty. The thatch curves where it meets the walls thick and soft like the edge of a blanket. When rain begins to fall, outside you can hear it drumming gently overhead, 1,000 tiny taps blending into a steady, soothing rhythm. Inside it feels almost musical. You can imagine families sitting quietly by the fire, listening to the sound, grateful for the barrier above them. The thatch, however, carried danger too. It was tinder waiting for a spark. One stray ember from the hearth, one gust of wind and the entire home could vanish in flame. Villages learned hard lessons this way. Some built small stone hearth surrounds to contain sparks. Others hung wet cloths from the rafters as a primitive firebreak. The fear of losing everything to fire was constant, as real as the cold itself. You think for a moment about the builders who laid these roofs. They must have known every rhythm of weather, every shift of wind. Their craft was passed from father to son, their fingers trained to twist straw in just the right direction so that water would slide away. It was a quiet art, built not from wealth but from observation as the rain continues. You notice how the sound above changes with the force of the wind. When it gusts, the straw hisses softly, but the structure holds. The air inside stays still and calm. For a moment you understand why medieval people saw their roofs almost as living companions, protective, moody and deserving of care. The room grows darker as the fire burns lower, and you can just make out the shapes of dried herbs hanging from the rafters. Their faint fragrance mingles with the smell of thatch, ash and smoke. The air feels thick, familiar and safe. You close your eyes and listen. The roof whispers its lullaby of rain and rustle, the same sound that carried countless families through countless winters. You open your eyes once more, glancing up at the golden weave overhead. The thatch may be rough and alive with hidden creatures, but it is also soft, protective and human. It reminds you that even the simplest things, when built with care, can hold the warmth of generations. The morning light filters faintly through a small square opening in the wall. You move closer and find not glass, but a thin sheet of translucent material stretched over a wooden frame. It looks fragile, like something that could crumble at a touch. You reach out and feel its texture, smooth, yet oddly uneven. This is your window, though it does little to keep out the chill. Windows in medieval peasant homes were rare, small and practical rather than decorative. Some had nothing more than wooden shutters to close at night. Others used horn scraped thin or oiled cloth to let in light while keeping out the worst of the wind. Historical records mention how these improvised panes blurred the outside world into soft shapes, turning daylight into a gentle golden haze. Imagine sitting near such a window on a winter morning, seeing trees and sky, as if through a dream. You lift the shutter and let the cold rush in the air bite sharply against your skin, carrying the smell of frost and smoke. You pull the panel closed again, and the difference is immediate. The air inside feels thicker, safer, though still far from warm. The family who lives here would keep the shutters tight most of the day, saving every scrap of heat the fire produced. Light was a luxury like warmth, measured carefully and never wasted. An interesting detail from some surviving cottages shows that wealthier peasants sometimes used parchment instead of horn. It was stretched tightly over small frames and treated with oil to make it translucent. The result was beautiful in its simplicity, a soft amber glow, gentle on the eyes. You can almost picture the golden light filling the smoky room, catching the edges of pots and pans, giving everything a quiet radiance. Not all researchers agree on how effective these materials were. Some believe they made little difference against the cold, while others argue that even a thin membrane could stop drafts and make the house noticeably more comfortable. Perhaps both are true, depending on how well they were fitted. What matters is the intention, the constant, patient effort to hold warmth inside, even when nature resisted. You lean closer to the frame and notice how it rattles slightly in the wind. The wood is rough and warped from years of damp weather. Someone has stuffed bits of cloth and straw into the gaps to stop the air from leaking in. The smell of dry grass rises faintly when the wind presses harder, reminding you of summer fields long gone. Such small tricks were part of everyday life. People learned to read their homes like living creatures, always listening for where the cold crept in. One curious discovery by archaeologists is that some window sills were lined with clay mixed with hair or moss. This strange mixture helped seal the frame and absorbed condensation before it dripped. You can imagine the small, clever hands that pressed it into place, knowing it would harden just enough to block the chill. Peasant ingenuity, quiet and constant, shaped comfort in ways that history rarely celebrates. When sunlight strikes the oiled cloth window, the effect is almost magical. The light spreads softly, turning smoke into mist, giving the room a golden shimmer. The people inside may not have called it beautiful, but it must have felt like a blessing. During the darkest months. Outside, the world was frozen. Inside it glowed faintly, alive with warmth and breath. Sometimes children would press their faces close to the pane. Peering out through the blur, they could see the outlines of neighbors moving, the slow flight of a bird, the shimmer of snow. The world outside looked distant, softened, less harsh. Perhaps that gentle distortion made winter easier to bear, turning it into a painting rather than a punishment. A small but touching custom existed in some villages where families placed candles or small oil lamps near the window at dusk. It was not just for light, it was a sign to travelers that warmth and company lay within. The faint glow shining through horn or cloth could be seen from far down the road, a reminder that even in the coldest season hospitality was sacred. You sit beneath the window now, feeling the faint chill that seeps through its edges. The light moves across your hands like warm honey, and for a moment the room feels almost comfortable. You understand why medieval people often associated light with divine favor. In a world so dark and smoky, a single beam of sunlight was enough to lift the spirit. Not every day brought light, though. In winter heavy clouds dimmed the world for weeks. The cottages would grow darker, the only illumination coming from the hearth. The air turned thick and shadowed, a blur of smoke and whispers. Yet even then people made their peace with the dimness. They rose and slept by firelight, their lives tuned to the slow rhythm of the Sunday. There is something quietly beautiful about that simplicity. To live without clear glass meant to live without perfection. The world outside was never seen sharply, but rather through texture and tone, like a painting softened by time. Perhaps that made it easier to accept hardship, to find beauty in suggestion instead of precision. You breathe deeply, watching dust dance in the sunlight. The air smells faintly of ash and straw. For a moment the golden light touches the floor, the walls, and your face. It feels ancient and gentle, like a blessing passed through centuries. You realize that before central heating and glass, light itself was warmth, fragile, fleeting and cherished. Outside, a gust of wind shakes the frame again. The cloth ripples slightly, its glow flickering like a candle. You reach out to steady it, your fingers tracing the rough edge of the wooden frame. The world beyond is blurred once more, hidden behind layers of oil, smoke and time. But inside this tiny space, the fire glows, the air hums softly, and the light, however faint, feels like enough. The wind sighs outside, again brushing against the walls like a patient animal. You pull your cloak tighter and glance at the people around the fire. Their clothing tells as much of their story as the walls and the smoke. It is thick, coarse and practical, made to hold warmth rather than impress. The fabrics are heavy with use, patched again and again until no single piece of cloth is original. In a world without central heating, clothes were your first defense, your portable shelter. Peasant garments were almost entirely wool and linen. Wool came from sheep kept in the village, and though it was scratchy, it was nearly miraculous in its ability to retain heat, even when damp linen was lighter, woven from flax and used for underlayers. Together they formed a balance between comfort and endurance. Historical accounts tell us that even the poorest peasants often owned at least 2 layers, a linen shift against the skin and a wool tunic or turtle above. Each layer trapped warmth, creating small pockets of air that the body's heat could fill. You can almost feel the texture of it, now rough against the skin, smelling faintly of lanolin and smoke. The scent never truly faded. Washing was rare in winter, and drying clothes by the fire only deepened their smoky perfume. People learned to live with that scent. It was the smell of survival, of homes that stayed just warm enough to outlast the frost. A small but fascinating detail comes from household records in Northern Europe, which mention peasants sleeping in their daytime clothes during the coldest months. There was no luxury of nightwear. The same garments served from sunrise to dawn. In some places, families even layered their outer cloaks on top of the bed at night, turning clothing into a communal blanket. You can imagine the quiet rustle of fabric and the shared breathing in the darkness, every inch of warmth preserved. Not all scholars agree on how colorful peasant clothing truly was. Some argue it was drab, dyed only with earth tones, or left uncolored to save cost. Others point to traces of plant-based dyes, madder for red, woad for blue, onion skin for yellow, found in textile remnants. Perhaps the truth lies in between. Even the humblest family might have owned one dyed garment, worn proudly on Sundays or festivals. A bright hood or scarf was not just decoration but a statement of spirit against the long gray winter. You look at the father by the fire, his cloak patched at the elbows, his belt made of braided leather. The mother's dress hangs heavy with folds that trap air. The children wear tunics belted with cords, their bare feet dirty but pink from the heat of the fire. The garments are simple, yet each is shaped perfectly for work and warmth. Function first, beauty second. And yet in the flickering light there is a certain grace to the way the wool drapes, to the quiet dignity of their repair work. One curious custom that appears in folk writings describes people filling small cloth pouches with heated stones or embers and tucking them under their tunics. On bitter days these makeshift warmers were tied close to the body, giving a short-lived but precious comfort during outdoor labor. It must have been a risky trick, balancing the danger of burns against the hunger for warmth. Still, the idea feels familiar, as if every generation since has searched for its own way to carry heat in the cold. You pick up a folded cloak from a bench and shake it out. The fabric feels heavy in your hands, woven thick and uneven. The edges are bound with a darker thread, perhaps from a later repair. Each mend is a record of care, a story stitched quietly into the weave. Clothing was expensive, often handed down through generations, so nothing was wasted. Even worn-out tunics became padding for shoes, bandages for wounds or rags to wrap infants. The idea of fashion as we know it did not exist here. Dress was about need, not novelty. But that does not mean it lacked meaning. To be wrapped in layers of fabric was to be protected, to be alive against the cold's indifference. When people gathered in the fields or markets, their clothing revealed who they were, not through wealth but through labor. The dirt on their hems, the patches on their sleeves, the soot on their cuffs, all spoke honestly of the lives they lived. You remember reading that in some villages unmarried women wore their hair uncovered, while married ones wrapped it in linen veils or coifs. These head coverings trapped warmth around the neck and ears, a small comfort that also marked one's place in the social order. The human need for both warmth and identity wove itself into every thread. The fire light flickers across the folds of cloth drying on a wooden peg. Steam rises faintly where moisture lingers. The smell of wool softens as it warms. You imagine how comforting that sight must have been after hours in frozen fields, a cloak hanging above the fire drying slowly, promising another day's endurance. A less-known habit in colder parts of Europe was to wear several small layers instead of one thick one. Peasants learned by experience that layers trapped air and kept the body's warmth more efficiently. It is the same principle you follow today with modern winter wear, though they discovered it centuries ago by instinct. You smile at the thought that some knowledge is eternal, handed down without words. As night deepens, the family gathers closer, each wrapped in their own cocoon of fabric. The soft rustle of cloth joins the crackle of the hearth. In this small circle of warmth, the world outside ceases to matter. Their garments are more than clothing. They are shields, memories and quiet companions through endless winters. You touch your sleeve and feel the rough weave, scratch your wrist. It connects you to them across time, reminding you that warmth has always been both a necessity and a form of love. Every patch, every stitch, every thread told a story of survival, and as the firelight dances across their humble garments, you realize that before there were heaters or comforters, there were hands, steady, patient and always sewing against the cold. The fire settles into a soft glow and the room grows quieter. Around you, the family begins to prepare for sleep. The floor is cleared of tools and bowls and straw is gathered from a pile in the corner. The air smells of earth, ash and wool. You watch as they spread the straw carefully, covering it with old cloth and flattened sacks. This is their bed, simple and shared, a fragile island of warmth in a sea of cold air. Peasants did not sleep on fine mattresses. Historical records reveal that most beds were nothing more than wooden frames filled with straw or reeds, sometimes stuffed into rough linen sacks called ticks. The straw had to be changed often, or it would grow damp and smell of mold. Still, for those who spent their days in fields and workshops, the feel of any softness under their bodies was a small luxury. The faint rustle of straw became the lullaby of countless medieval nights. You notice the family's sleeping arrangement. The parents lie closest to the hearth, where the warmth lingers longest. The children nestle around them, some on the same bed, others in smaller piles of straw nearby. They sleep close not just for affection but for survival. The heat of one body helped warm another. The idea of personal space did not exist here. Warmth was communal, shared like food and stories. An intriguing record from English memorial rolls described servants sleeping in the same room as their masters, separated only by a curtain or a chest. Privacy was rare and intimacy was practical. Everyone listened to the same fire, breathed the same smoke and woke to the same chill. It may sound uncomfortable, but it made people deeply aware of one another's rhythms, the sighs, the shivers, the whispers before dawn. Some historians still debate whether peasants truly slept through the entire night in a world lit only by fire. Sleep came in segments. People often woke after a few hours, stirred the hearth, whispered prayers or tended to infants, then went back to bed for a second sleep. The term survives faintly in old texts, hinting at a different understanding of rest. The long dark of winter nights invited that rhythm, wakefulness, reflection and then surrender to dreams again. You sit quietly and listen to the sounds of bedtime. The fire gives a gentle pop, someone shifts in the straw, the rustling like the movement of dry leaves. The air is cold against your face, but under the blanket of shared heat it feels almost bearable. The room fills with steady breathing. Even the animals in the adjoining stall have gone. Still, a curious little practice worth noting was the use of warmed stones wrapped in cloth as a primitive hot water bottle. Families heated them by the fire, then placed them at their feet in bed. The stones cooled slowly through the night, giving off a faint, comforting warmth. You imagine the soft pleasure of touching that heat after hours of labor in the cold. Such small inventions remind you how creative necessity can be. Linen sheets, when they existed, were coarse and rough by modern standards. Most peasants used blankets of wool or animal skins, sometimes layered with old clothing for extra insulation. Wealthier households hung curtains around their beds, not for privacy alone but to trap heat. The enclosed space created a miniature room within a room, a small sanctuary against drafts. Even in poorer homes, people sometimes hung simple cloths or mats to block the cold air from the door. There is a tenderness in how they prepare for sleep. The father carefully stirs the fire to make sure the embers last until morning. The mother tucks the youngest child beneath the blanket of patched wool. Her hand lingers a moment on the child's head, smoothing the tangled hair. No one speaks, yet everything feels said. Some experts suggest that sleeping together created strong family bonds, but also made illness spread quickly. Colds, fevers, and infections passed from one to all. Yet people accepted this as part of life. To sleep apart would mean to freeze alone. The warmth of another human was the cheapest and chest form of comfort available. As you lie down on the straw, the first thing you notice is the uneven texture beneath your back. It crackles faintly, shifting with each breath. The blanket scratches your skin and the air smells faintly of smoke and wool. But then you begin to feel the slow build of warmth from the surrounding bodies. It spreads quietly, like the fire's glow, returning through touch instead of flame. There is a peaceful rhythm in it. The house itself seems to breathe along with the sleepers. The wind outside hums low, pressing gently against the thatch. The fire murmurs softly, its embers pulsing red. You close your eyes and for a moment the discomfort fades. What remains is the steady presence of life, the same ancient instinct that made humans huddle together long before walls were built. One might call it primitive, but it is also profoundly human. The medieval night was long, silent and deep. Yet within these humble walls, warmth was a shared act of care. Each sleeping figure helped the others survive until morning. Every sigh of contentment, every shift in the straw, every faint glow of embers was part of a fragile, enduring harmony. You listen one last time before drifting off. The whisper of straw, the faint crackle of ash, the soft breathing of family all blend into something timeless. The bed may be rough, the air may bite, but warmth exists here, created not by machines but by closeness. And as sleep takes you, the line between body and home fades. The straw becomes the earth, the blanket becomes the night, and the fire's glow lingers behind your eyelids like a dream of summer. The night deepens and somewhere in the quiet, a log collapses in the hearth with a soft hiss. You open your eyes to see sparks drifting upward like golden insects before vanishing into the smoke. The warmth that once filled the room has thinned. The fire has burned low. Its light, a dim, flickering heart barely alive. In a house like this, that faint glow meant both safety and danger. To let the embers die was to invite frost into your bones, yet to leave the flames unwatched was to risk waking in a world of fire. Every medieval household carried that tension. The hearth was the friend that might turn traitor. Records from memorial courts often mention accidental fires. Entire villages lost when one roof caught and spread the flames to its neighbors. Thatched roofs, dry from summer and brittle from smoke, needed only one spark to become kindling. People lived with this awareness, always a quiet fear beneath every comfort. You rise carefully, stepping closer to the hearth. The air near it still trembles with heat. The stones around the fire are blackened, worn smooth by years of tending. You take a long stick and push at the embers, spreading them gently so they breathe again. The faint red brightens for a moment, casting a soft blush on the walls. That simple act, so ordinary, was a nightly ritual for survival. Some families buried the fire under ashes before bed, sealing the heat like a secret. In the morning they would uncover the embers and feed them dry twigs until a new flame caught. The practice was called banking the fire, and it kept the household alive from one day to the next. It was not just convenience. Making fire from scratch was slow and precious. Flint and steel could fail and tinder could be too damp to catch. A single spark once lost meant hours of effort to reclaim it. An odd but fascinating trick mentioned in early writings describes peasants carrying small clay pots of embers from house to house. If a neighbor's fire died, another would share a few glowing coals wrapped in moss or cloth. Warmth passed from one home to another like a sacred trust. You can imagine them walking through the night, careful steps on frozen earth, the glow of life cupped in both hands. There is disagreement among historians about how often such fires went out completely. Some claim families were meticulous about tending them, while others believe the constant work, illness and exhaustion made it common for flames to fail. Either way, losing your fire in the dead of winter felt like losing part of your soul. The fire was not just heat, it was continuity. You sit by the hearth again, the smell of wood and smoke thick in the air. The fire murmurs softly, a whisper. More than a roar. It feels alive but fragile, a small creature that must be watched. People spoke to it, sometimes muttering blessings or simple, thanks. The hearth spirit, they believed, listened. If treated kindly, it would protect the family from harm. If neglected, it might punish them with cold or misfortune. These superstitions sound strange now, but they gave shape to fear, turning uncertainty into ritual. Outside, a faint wind rises, the door rattles slightly and a draft curls around your ankles. The temperature drops. You picture how many nights were spent like this, half asleep, one ear tuned to the sound of the fire, ready to wake at the wrong crackle or smell of burning straw. There was no deep sleep in such places, only brief surrender. One curious precaution found in some regions was the use of hanging cauldrons or chain hooks above the fire. These kept cooking pots from tipping and spilling embers. Some homes even built a ring of damp clay or stone around the hearth to contain sparks. You can imagine how valuable that small circle of safety felt, a boundary between warmth and destruction. The light flickers weakly now, painting shadows that dance along the walls. You notice how the family's faces glow red in the dimness, their eyes half closed with fatigue. The father stirs, reaching out to shift a log. His movements are instinctive, almost dreamlike, practiced from childhood. Keeping the fire alive is second nature, a rhythm as old as breathing. At times, fires did escape control. Travelers' tales speak of nights when wind swept through open doors and scattered sparks into the straw bedding. Within moments, the room became a storm of light and smoke. Villages learned to respond quickly, forming chains of people to throw water or smother flames with wet cloths. Yet water was often scarce in winter, and sometimes all they could do was watch and pray. Despite the danger, people could not live without fire. It was too central, too bound to their daily needs. Cooking, light, warmth and even protection from predators all depended on it. Some ancient customs treated the hearth as sacred, the center of the home spirit. In weddings, couples might take embers from their parents' fires to light their own, symbolizing the continuation of family and warmth. It was a gesture both practical and poetic. You reach for a small log beside the hearth and set it on the coals. The wood catches slowly, smoke curling upward before flame appears. The orange light grows, filling the room with its heartbeat. Again, the chill recedes. You realize that this is what survival looked like for centuries, tending the fragile glow through darkness, keeping just enough fire to last until dawn. The villagers outside are doing the same at this very moment. Tiny flames flicker in every cottage, each one a separate sun holding back the night. The world feels vast, but the act is universal, millions of hands across generations feeding warmth into darkness. The fire steadies, now soft and golden. You can hear the faint crackle as resin burns inside the wood, a small song of persistence. The smoke climbs slow and sure toward the roof hole. The danger is still there, but for now peace holds. You lean back watching the glow shimmer on the faces of the sleeping family. They are safe tonight, wrapped in the fragile promise of fire. And as your eyes grow heavy, you understand why ancient people prayed to flame, not for wealth or power, but for this. A light that endures through the cold. Morning returns pale and cold. The light from the roof hole touches your face and the smell of smoke still clings to your hair. You stretch, feeling the stiffness in your limbs. Outside, faint sounds of work echo through the village, the scrape of wooden rakes, the rhythmic creak of a cart, the muted voices of people already facing another freezing day. The warmth from the night has gone, and the air feels sharp again, biting at your fingertips. Work does not wait for comfort. Even in winter, peasants labored from dawn to dusk. Historical writings describe men trudging into fields hardened by frost, their breath turning to mist as they swung spades or axes. Women rose early to fetch water from the well, the bucket's rim coated in ice. Life required constant movement because stillness meant cold. You can almost feel the sting of that first gust of outdoor air on your cheeks, the moment when the body wakes with a jolt of necessity. They dressed in layers, wrapping scarves around their faces, tying cloaks tight, slipping on leather boots stuffed with straw for insulation. The clothes were never enough, but motion created warmth. You watch as a young man chops wood in front of his cottage. Every swing of the axe sends a thud through the frozen air. Sweat beads on his forehead despite the chill. The heat of labor becomes his only fire. In the fields, work changes with the season. Winter meant repairing tools, mending fences and tending livestock more than sowing. The rhythm slowed but never stopped. Livestock still needed feeding, water still needed carrying and tools still needed sharpening. A chronicler from the 14th century once noted that the cold cares not for rank and all must move to live. It was a truth every peasant knew instinctively. One curious detail from medieval records shows that some villages scheduled tasks according to warmth. People worked outdoors during the brief midday sun, then gathered indoors for spinning, weaving or carving as light faded. The hours themselves shaped by temperature rather than timepieces. Imagine how the sun became not just light but a clock telling everyone when to labor and when to rest. Not all researchers agree on how much leisure winter truly allowed. Some argue that peasants enjoyed slower days between harvests, while others insist the need to survive erased any notion of rest. What is certain is that warmth came through movement. A still body chilled quickly, but one that worked going, milking, chopping or carrying, created its own heat. Work and survival were the same gesture, repeated endlessly. The smell of cold earth fills the air as you step outside. The village road is frozen, hard-marked with the prints of boots and hooves. A woman passes carrying a basket of kindling. Her breath clouds before her as she hums softly, a tune rising and fading with her steps. Each villager moves with purpose, as if guided by invisible rhythm. Together they form a quiet ballet of endurance choreographed by winter's demands. A small but fascinating habit noted in medieval housekeeping manuals was rubbing hands with animal fat or wax to prevent frostbite. The greasy film trapped a thin layer of warmth. It must have smelled unpleasant, but practicality came first. The same mixture was used on wooden tools to keep them from cracking in the cold. Every surface, living or not, needed protection from winter's hunger. Children, of course, worked too. They herded animals, gathered twigs, fetched water and swept snow from doorways. Their laughter occasionally brightened the dull air. But even their games carried purpose. Throwing snow, running races, chasing chickens all kept their bodies warm. Play was survival disguised as joy. As midday arrives, the sun offers its weakest warmth. A few men share bread and ale near the edge of the field. The bread is hard, the ale lukewarm. Yet the act of eating together carries comfort. The drink warms from within, spreading slow and steady like an inner hearth. Someone tells a story and laughter rises, visible in the frosty air. For a moment the cold retreats inside the cottages. Women spin wool or patch garments. Their fingers move quickly, nimble, despite the chill. The whir of the spindle becomes a soft background, sound, rhythmic and hypnotic. The motion keeps the blood flowing. One might call it work, but it also becomes meditation, a kind of warmth that begins in the hands and spreads through concentration. An odd but clever trick from some regions involved placing flat stones near the hearth during the day, then slipping them into the bed at night for heat. You can picture the satisfaction of touching that brief warmth against your feet before sleep. Such small efforts made the long winters bearable. Tiny victories over the relentless cold. By afternoon, clouds thicken, and the wind sharpens again. Smoke from every roof drifts low, pressed down by the weight of sky. The villagers hurry to finish their tasks before darkness falls. The day's warmth earned through labor begins to fade with the light. You follow them back toward their homes, hearing doors creak and close one by one. The sound feels final, like a sigh shared by the whole village. Inside, once more, you feel the familiar weight of the smoky air. The fire burns brighter, now fed by the wood chopped earlier. The warmth touches your face and for a moment the aches in your hands ease. The family gathers around the hearth, again quiet but content. Outside, winter rages without pity. Inside, sweat, damp clothes steam gently as people settle near the glow. The day's labor has done its work. Muscles burn, lungs ache, but the cold has been kept at bay for one more day. You sense the calm that follows exhaustion, the kind that makes sleep feel like a blessing. Every breath carries gratitude, though no one speaks it aloud. As night descends, you realize that this endless pattern of work and rest is not hardship but rhythm. The medieval peasants' warmth came from motion, from effort, from shared labor beneath a hostile sky. It was a dance as old as humankind. The pulse of life beating stubbornly against the cold. Evening falls once more, and with it comes hunger. The day's labor leaves every limb heavy, every thought drawn toward food and fire. You sit near the hearth as the mother of the household stirs a pot hung over the flames. The scent is thick and earthy, a blend of barley, onions and something faintly meaty. It is not a feast, but it is warmth you can taste. The medieval peasant's diet was designed not for pleasure but survival. Chroniclers of the age often remarked that bread, pottage and ale formed the trinity of daily nourishment. Bread filled the belly, pottage provided variety and ale gave strength when water could not be trusted. The food was simple, yet it contained everything needed to endure the cold. Every meal was a calculated act of keeping warm from within the pottage, a kind of thick soup changed with the seasons. In summer, it held fresh herbs and greens. In winter, it thickened with grains, dried peas and root vegetables stored since autumn. On lucky days a bit of bacon or lard gave it depth. You can imagine the satisfaction of that first spoonful after hours in frozen fields, the steam rising like a promise. An odd yet surprisingly practical custom mentioned in old village notes was the use of hot stones to keep food from cooling too fast. Stones heated in the fire were dropped into the pot, then cleaned and set aside for reuse. It was a small innovation, but in a home without ovens or metal pans it meant the difference between a warm supper and a cold one. You hear one of the children laugh as a stone hisses in the broth, sending up a puff of steam. Historians continue to discuss how much meat the average peasant actually ate. Some argue it was a rare luxury reserved for feast days or those who worked for wealthier landowners. Others point to evidence of game and fish in refuge pits, suggesting that resourceful villagers found ways to supplement their diet despite restrictions. The truth likely varied from place to place. What united them all was the awareness that every calorie counted, especially when cold ruled the land. You watch as the family gathers around the pot bowls are filled with the thick steaming mixture. The wooden spoons clatter gently against their rims. The ale, cloudy and slightly sour, is poured into shared cups. Its warmth spreads through your chest as you take a sip, the faint bitterness chased by heat. It is not luxury, but it is life. There is something deeply human in this ritual. Every evening, no matter how bleak the day, the act of eating together restores a sense of balance. The peasants knew that hunger could dull not only the body but also the spirit around the hearth. Food became memory and comfort, a reminder that warmth could come from flavor as much as from flame. One curious note from medical writings of the time suggests that certain spices, ginger, pepper and mustard, were believed to heat the blood. These were expensive imports, but even a pinch could transform a meal into medicine. Wealthy households used them freely, while peasants occasionally received them as gifts during holy days. The idea that warmth could be swallowed must have felt like a small miracle. You can almost taste the balance of salt and smoke in the pottage, the way each mouthful lingers. The sound of eating is quiet but rhythmic, punctuated by murmured conversation. The family does not rush, every spoonful matters. When the pot is nearly empty, the mother adds water, stretches the leftovers and hangs it back over the fire. For tomorrow, nothing is wasted. As the meal ends, the family sits still for a moment. The heat from food and flame blends in the air and the mood softens. Hunger is gone, and with it the sharpness of the cold outside feels less threatening. The body, filled and warmed, can finally relax. You understand, then, why peasants described good food as fire for the belly. It was not poetry, it was truth. Some researchers point out that medieval diets, though plain, were surprisingly balanced for their time. Grains provided energy, vegetables added fiber, and ale supplied both calories and hydration. It was not indulgence but endurance, an accidental science born of necessity. The human body learned to thrive on what was available, finding strength in the simplest combinations. After the bowls are cleared, the father takes a crust of bread and uses it to wipe the pot clean, eating the last trace of warmth. The children lick their spoons. Laughter flickers briefly before exhaustion takes over. The room smells of stew and smoke, the scent of survival that has no need of luxury. You sit back, letting the heaviness of the meal settle in your stomach. Outside, the wind moans softly across the frozen fields. Inside, bellies are full, hands are warm, and the glow of the hearth has grown steady again. The family's faces reflect the fire light like amber. The world beyond these walls may be bitter, but here, in this fragile circle of warmth, the cold has been defeated. For another night. You sip one last mouthful of ale and feel its warmth linger in your throat. The taste is earthy, rough but alive. You think of how food and fire have always shared a single purpose, to remind us that life continues, even in the longest winter. As the bowls are stacked and the family settles again, you realize that every meal in a peasant's world was more than nourishment. It was defiance, a quiet declaration that the cold could not claim everything. The evening has deepened into full night. The fire burns low but steady, and the faint light dances across the family's faces. Outside, the wind howls through the bare branches. But here inside there is another kind of warmth, one shared between neighbors. You hear a soft knock at the door, and when it opens, a rush of cold air follows, two villagers carrying a basket wrapped in cloth. The smell of baked bread fills the room and everyone's faces brighten at once. This is the night of the village bakehouse. In most medieval communities, ovens were not inside individual homes. They belonged to the village as a shared resource. The cost and danger of maintaining a large oven were too great for one family alone, so people came together to bake their loaves in one great, glowing chamber of stone. The shared oven was both necessity and gathering place, the beating heart of communal life. You follow the family through the darkness, their lanterns flickering against the snow. The path winds between cottages until it opens into a small square where smoke curls from a low stone building. The door glows faintly from within. As you step inside, the air hits you like a wave, hot, fragrant and alive with sound. Dozens of loaves sit cooling on wooden planks, their crusts dark and crisp. The smell of yeast, ash and flour fills your lungs. Chroniclers describe how the village oven, often owned by the lord of the manor or by the church, became a place where news was exchanged and friendships renewed. People gathered while their bread baked, sharing gossip, stories and sometimes songs. For an hour or two the hardships of winter seemed lighter. You can almost hear it now, the laughter, the hiss of heat, the rhythm of work made joyful by company. An odd little tradition recorded in some regions was marking loaves with unique symbols. Before baking, families cut or pressed their own signs across a line, a pattern of dots into the dough, to claim it later. The oven might hold dozens of loaves at once, and these marks were both identification and protection. The cross in particular was thought to bless the bread, ensuring it rose well and fed the family safely. You imagine the small pride in seeing your mark come out golden and perfect. Not every historian agrees on how often the communal oven was used. Some believe it was weekly, tied to the rhythm of Sabbath rest, while others think poorer families baked less often, stretching their loaves for as long as possible. In hard winters bread could grow tough and dry, softened only by dipping it into hot broth or ale. But whether weekly or rare, the visit to the oven was always a highlight. It meant warmth, companionship and the smell of comfort spreading through the frozen village. The oven itself was a marvel of craft. Its walls were thick stone lined with clay, able to hold heat for hours. After lighting a fire inside to heat it, the ashes were swept out and the loaves placed inside on flat paddles. The door was sealed with clay or ash paste to trap the heat. You can picture it, the glow fading as the fire dies, the silence settling as bread slowly rises in the dark. The act feels almost sacred, a transformation shaped by patience and flame. Sometimes the baker was a hired figure responsible for tending the oven and collecting a fee or a portion of each loaf as payment. Other times, villagers took turns managing the fire. A common saying went, "He who guards the oven guards the village," because the same flame that baked bread could also keep watch against cold and hunger. One curious and practical detail from medieval household accounts mentions that after the bread was removed, families sometimes used the remaining warmth to cook stews or dry herbs. Nothing was wasted. The heat of the oven fading slowly through the night became a shared gift. You can imagine neighbors slipping in quietly after baking time, placing small pots of beans or apples inside to soften overnight. The air in the morning would be filled with the scent of slow-cooked comfort. You glance around the bake house, the walls are black with soot, but the atmosphere is cheerful. The faces of the villagers glow in the firelight as they trade loaves and laughter. A child sneaks a piece of crust and is gently scolded before being handed another, warmer one. The sound of voices blends with the hum of the fire like music. Food here is more than sustenance. It is community made visible. The warmth of the oven gathers everyone together, blurring lines of wealth and rank. The poor man's loaf bakes beside the reeves. The same flame touches both. In that shared heat, differences fade for a little while. The family you followed receives their bread at last, a small round loaf, dark from the ash but smelling heavenly. They cradle it carefully, wrapping it in cloth to keep it warm for the walk home. As you follow them back through the snow, the bread steams faintly in the cold air, leaving a trail of scent behind inside their cottage. Again, the loaf is placed on the table like a treasure. The father breaks it with his hands rather than a knife, as tradition requires. The crust cracks softly, releasing more warmth. The children lean close, breathing in the smell. A piece of bread, this fresh, is a feast, and even plain. It carries the flavor of the village itself, smoke, wood, labor, and laughter. You take a bite and feel its warmth spread through you. The outside is crisp, the inside dense and chewy. Every crumb speaks of shared work and shared fire. It is simple food, but it holds a quiet perfection born of necessity and togetherness. Outside, the village sleeps beneath its blanket of frost. Inside, the oven's last heat lingers, traveling from hand to hand, from loaf to heart. You close your eyes and realize that in a world without central heating, it was not only fire that kept people alive, but community, the steady warmth of people standing together against the cold. The air inside the cottage carries a new sound now, low grunts and soft shuffling. Beyond the thin wooden partition you glance over and notice movement behind a rough wall of boards and straw. A cow's nose pushes through a gap, snorting quietly. The family barely reacts to them. This is normal life. The animals share their home not out of affection but for warmth and survival. It might surprise you, but many medieval peasants kept their livestock inside or directly attached to their living quarters. Historical accounts and surviving longhouses show that humans and animals often shared a single structure, separated only by a wooden screen or low wall. The body heat from cows, goats and pigs helped raise the temperature of the room by several degrees. It was primitive central heating powered by hooves and breath. You step closer, the smell becoming stronger, a mix of hay, manure, and damp wool. The floor beneath the animals is layered with straw, rarely changed in winter to conserve effort and warmth. Each movement produces a faint crackle, the rustling of dried reeds mingling with the soft chewing of hay. The warmth radiates gently toward you. It is not pleasant, but it is real. A curious but well-documented custom in some regions was to let chickens roost in the rafters above the family's sleeping area. Their small bodies gave little heat, but their presence was comforting. At dawn, their clucking served as an alarm long before church bells. Imagine waking to that chorus every morning. The rhythm of life marked not by clocks but by the needs of animals. Archaeological remains and written records both confirm this closeness between humans and beasts. Some scholars argue that it blurred the boundary between home and barn so completely that the two were almost one. Others suggest that it reflected not poverty but practicality. Livestock were the family's most valuable assets: food, milk, wool, and fertilizer. Keeping them close was not neglect but protection. The family treats their animals with a quiet familiarity. The father checks the cow's tether, speaking softly under his breath. The mother throws a handful of hay into the pen. The children giggle when a goat bleats impatiently. Life inside this small space is crowded, noisy and fragrant, yet somehow harmonious. Everyone, human and animal alike, contributes warmth and survival. One interesting finding from old accounts is that peasants often named their animals, not out of sentimentality but identification. In a village where most creatures looked alike, a name helped track which cow belonged to whom. Yet over time, affection slipped into the routine. A family might mourn the loss of a good milk cow as they would a neighbor. The connection was emotional as much as practical. The sound of breathing fills the air. You can almost feel the moisture building, the warm exhalations rising to meet the smoke curling down from the ceiling. It creates a strange balance, the fire's dry heat mixing with the animal's humid breath, the two forming a livable if heavy atmosphere. A detail often overlooked in modern imagination is that this arrangement helped more than temperature. The manure accumulated in winter was valuable fuel for spring crops. It dried slowly inside, then was taken to the fields when the thaw came. Even waste had purpose. Nothing in this world was idle. Not everyone approved of the arrangement. Clergy and visitors from towns often complained of beasts sleeping with men like brothers, calling it indecent or unhealthy. But the villagers ignored such scolding. Their concern was not propriety but survival. The heat of a single cow could mean the difference between comfort and frostbite during the darkest nights. You crouch beside the wooden barrier and meet the slow gaze of the cow. Its breath steams in the air, its hide glossy. In the firelight you can smell its warmth, sharp and animal, but somehow reassuring. The sound of its slow chewing becomes a rhythm that matches the crackle of the fire. In this place all life moves to one quiet tempo. A small and curious custom recorded in folk traditions mentions whispering blessings to animals on Christmas Eve. When it was believed they could speak, families would feed them extra hay or bread, thanking them for their work through the year. It was a moment of gratitude toward creatures that carried both burden and warmth through winter. You can imagine the flicker of candles, the gentle touch of a hand on fur and the whispered wish for another year of survival. As the night grows colder outside, the presence of the animals becomes even more noticeable. The room holds a soft, living heat that lingers near the ground. The smell is strong, but it carries safety. The mixture of fire, light, straw and low, steady breath creates a sense of shelter deeper than walls can provide. You realize that this shared life made people deeply aware of the cycles of nature. They knew their animals as individuals, observed their moods, their health, their habits. Warmth was not a gift from wood or stone alone. It came from coexistence. The peasants lived within an ecosystem rather than apart from it. You close your eyes for a moment, listening to the combined heartbeat of the home. The fire pops softly, the cow shifts its weight somewhere in the rafters, a chicken rustles its feathers. The air is thick but alive, filled with quiet cooperation in the flickering light. You understand that before radiators and furnaces, warmth was not a mechanical thing. It was a relationship, a partnership between humans, animals, and the fragile shelter that contained them all. The comfort you feel now is not clean or refined, but it is profoundly human. Morning begins with a faint light, the kind that carries no warmth. The fire is a handful of embers now, and the air bites at your skin the moment you sit up. The family moves quietly, layering cloaks and scarves before stepping outside. You follow them into the pale winter dawn. Frost glitters on every surface, from the branches of trees to the rough wooden fence posts. The village bell tolls softly, summoning people toward the church. The church stands at the center of the settlement. Its stone walls gray and cold against the sky. You can see your breath as you walk. Each exhale, a small cloud. The door cars open and you step into a space that feels both vast and frozen. Inside the air is even colder than outside. The stone absorbs every hint of warmth. You shiver and understand at once that faith in these centuries required physical endurance as much as spiritual devotion. Churches in the medieval world were rarely heated. Fire inside was dangerous and often forbidden. The flicker of candles and the breath of worshippers were the only warmth to be found. Contemporary descriptions tell of congregations huddled together, their cloaks wrapped tightly, whispering prayers with numb lips. The smell inside was of wax, damp stone and humanity. It was not comforted that drew people here, but obligation and hope. You find a place among them, kneeling on the cold floor. The stone presses through the thin soles of your shoes and the chill creeps upward through your legs. Yet there is a strange calm in it. The sound of Latin chants fills the air, slow and low, like distant wind. The rhythm of voices seems to warm the heart, even when the body cannot follow. An intriguing note from church records describes how some parishioners brought small hand warmers, little clay pots filled with glowing embers. Wrapped in rags, they were carried discreetly beneath cloaks during long services. The faint heat must have felt like a secret blessing, shared quietly between faith and necessity. You can imagine a woman's hands hidden in her lap cupping the warmth while the priest spoke of salvation. Scholars still discuss how these unheated spaces shaped religious experience. Some argue that the physical hardship made faith more profound. To pray through the cold was to prove devotion. Others believe that it dulled attention and turned worship into mere endurance. Perhaps both are true. The act of gathering, even in discomfort, carried meaning beyond ease or pleasure. It was the village uniting under one roof, enduring together. You look around at the people kneeling beside you. Their breath hangs in the air, glowing faintly in the candlelight. Their faces are serious but not grim. There is strength in the stillness. For them, warmth is not comfort. It is community, the shared body of faith pressing together against the cold. The priest's voice echoes through the church, rising and falling. The Latin words are ancient, their meanings half lost to the common folk. Yet the rhythm soothes them. The sound itself becomes warmth, filling the space that the fire cannot you feel. It vibrates through the floor, through your knees, through your bones. A curious old tradition describes how people used to cluster near the church candles during long masses. The largest candles burning for saints or the dead were said to carry a little heat. Children and the elderly would drift toward them, pretending to pray more fervently, just to feel the faint warmth. The wax softened, slowly dripping onto the stone, marking time in molten gold. The cold had a way of binding everyone together. Rich and poor knelt side by side, their breath mingling in the same air. The same frost bit their fingers, the same prayers rose from their lips. The church became a great equalizer, where the Lord's fine cloak and the peasant's patched one shivered side by side. Even discomfort could be holy. You close your eyes for a moment and listen. The chant fades, replaced by the sound of rustling fabric, creaking benches, the shuffle of boots on stone. The service is ending. People cross themselves, then move toward the door where sunlight spills in like a flood. You step outside and feel the weak warmth of the sun on your face. After the still icy air inside, it feels almost merciful. In some villages the churchyard served as a place to warm up after Mass. People lingered, stamping their feet, greeting neighbors and sharing bits of news. Someone might offer a sip of ale or a bite of bread. It was not frivolous but necessary, a way to restore life to stiff limbs before returning home. Even in worship, survival shaped behavior. One curious observation from later chronicles notes that medieval builders began adding small openings, called leper windows, near the church's side walls. These allowed the sick or excluded to hear the service without entering. Some historians suggest that the open shutters let in drafts that made the interior even colder. Yet no one dared close them fully. Salvation, it seemed, was worth the chill. As the crowd disperses, you linger for a moment looking back at the church. The stone glows faintly in the sunlight and a few candles still flicker through the doorway. You realize that faith for these people was not an escape from the cold but a way of bearing it, the endurance learned at home carried into prayer. When you return to the cottage, the hearth has been rekindled. The difference between the two spaces is striking, one holy and cold, the other smoky and alive. Yet both are sanctuaries in their own way. The villagers have built warmth where they can, whether through fire or through faith. You sit again by the hearth listening to the crackle of wood. The memory of the frozen church lingers in your bones, but the comfort here feels deeper now. Perhaps that is what the peasants understood best, that warmth means nothing without contrast, and light is only sacred when it follows darkness. The cold settles harder that night, the kind of cold that makes silence ache. The air outside freezes so completely that even sound seems trapped in the frost. When you step out of the cottage, the world feels brittle under your feet. Snow crunches with each step and the stars above glitter like ice chips scattered across black glass. Winter has claimed everything now, and with it comes a quiet that feels eternal. During these long freezes, hunger often followed close behind. Grain stores ran low, livestock grew thin and the forest offered little but bare branches. Chronicles from the 14th and 15th century speak of winters so cruel that rivers froze solid and travelers were found stiff along the roads. For peasants, the challenge was not just cold but the steady fear that food and firewood would not last until spring. You walk toward the edge of the village and see figures bending near the frozen stream, hacking through ice with wooden mallets. The water below is sluggish, half frozen, and must be fetched quickly before it seals again. Their breaths hang in the air as they work. Every sound, hammer, crack, splash, seems louder in the stillness. The cold magnifies everything. Inside the cottages, the air is smoky, but alive. People wrap themselves in every scrap of wool, press close together and eat whatever they can. When grain is gone, they grind acorns or chestnuts into flour. When lard is empty, they stretch thin broth with herbs or bits of dried fish. These were the hungry months, known in some places as the starving season. Yet even then people endured, clinging to routine like a shield. A curious account from a medieval monk describes villagers warming stones by the fire, then burying them in barrels of grain to keep devils away and prevent dampness. It was a clever act of preservation that also lent a touch of heat to their stored food. You imagine the faint warmth spreading through the wooden barrels. A little comfort for the meals yet to come. Historians still disagree on how severe medieval winters truly were compared to ours. Some say they were colder because of what later scholars called the Little Ice Age, a climatic shift that began in the late Middle Ages. Others argue that human endurance was simply stronger then, that people spoke less of cold because it was as ordinary as rain. Either way, the evidence remains in bones, pollen and records of famine. The earth itself cooled and with it came suffering that shaped entire generations. You can see the toll it takes on faces in your mind's eye, skin dry and pale lips, cracked eyes ringed with fatigue. Every task demands more effort. Firewood runs out and families walk miles through the snow to gather twigs or pull fence posts from the frozen ground. Some cut down roofs of abandoned barns for fuel. Every flame becomes a victory. In years of famine, people turned to desperate measures. Some boiled bark, some ate roots usually meant for animals. There are stories of bread mixed with ground ferns or powdered bone to make it last. Yet even in such hardship, festivals continued, prayers were said, and laughter still found its way into the evenings. The human spirit, it seems, burned as stubbornly as any hearth. An old folk tale from France speaks of a winter so cold that birds froze in flight and fell like stones. To fight it, villagers supposedly built a single great fire in the town square, feeding it day and night with every scrap of wood. They could find people slept around it wrapped in blankets and hopes. Whether the story is true or not, it carries the essence of survival through unity. The same flame that warmed one could warm all. You return to the cottage as the wind picks up. Inside, the family huddles near the hearth. Their meal tonight is small, a thin grume of oats and onions. The smell is faint, but it fills the room with comfort. The mother dips a ladle and offers the first spoonful to her youngest child, who smiles despite the chill. That small gesture feels larger than any feast. A faint scratching at the door makes everyone pause. It is a neighbor, his face flushed from cold. Holding a small bundle of firewood, he shares it without ceremony, as though giving away nothing more than a greeting. The father nods, pushes a few of the logs toward the fire, and the flame brightens instantly. For a moment the entire room glows gold. Generosity in winter is warmth itself. It was in winters like these that faith and folklore intertwined most tightly. People believed that kind acts strengthened not only the body but the soul. To give bread or wood was to invite blessings, to hoard them risked misfortune. The cold, it seemed, tested not only endurance but morality. You sense that truth as you watch the flames dance on tired faces. Outside, the snow falls again, slow and soundless. Each flake catches the faint orange light leaking through the door cracks. Inside, the family eats, the animals shift softly, and the fire hums its low, eternal song. The world beyond could be endless ice, but here life persists, quiet, steady, human. When the meal ends, the father pokes the fire one last time, then covers the embers with ash to keep them alive until morning. The mother hums an old song while folding the last blanket. The melody is gentle, half Leah, half prayer. It drifts through the smoky air and settles on your skin like warmth itself. In that sound you feel everything. This age teaches patience, gratitude, and the courage to find beauty, even in frost. The world outside may freeze, but inside something glows that no winter can extinguish. When morning comes, the cold feels almost solid, as if the air itself has turned to glass. Every breath stings and every sound carries far. You watch the father step outside, his boots crunching through the frost. He carries an axe over his shoulder, heading toward the edge of the woods. Firewood is life now, every log, every branch is a piece of survival. Fuel is scarce. The forests that once seemed endless are now controlled by lords or the church. Records from memorial courts reveal that peasants who cut trees without permission could face fines or worse punishment in public. Yet necessity does not wait for law. People collect what they can: fallen branches, dead wood, bits of brush, even small sticks matter. Every handful can stretch the fire another hour. You follow the father through the frozen fields toward the tree-line. His breath rises in pale clouds as he scans the ground for fallen wood. The forest stands quiet, every branch heavy with frost. He bends, gathers what he can, stacking it carefully in his bundle. The smell of pine and frozen sap fills the air, sharp and clean. A curious habit noted in old accounts tells of peasants burning almost anything that could catch fire: dried peat from bogs, bundles of straw, even animal dung mixed with mud and left to harden in the sunday. It sounds unpleasant to modern ears, but those fuel cakes burned slowly, providing steady heat without wasting wood. In the poorest regions, entire families spent summer months preparing dung fuel for the coming winter. The scent, once familiar, marked both life and necessity. There is debate among environmental historians about how sustainable these methods were. Some believe peasants understood their landscapes deeply, taking only what could be renewed. Others argue that desperation led to deforestation, stripping the land bare in places. The truth may lie somewhere between a cycle of scarcity and adaptation, where every season demanded new strategies for warmth. You kneel near a half-frozen pond where women cut blocks of peat from the ground, stacking them neatly to dry. Their hands are red from cold, their breath quick and white. They laugh softly despite their exhaustion. Peat was the poor man's treasure, dense with stored energy from ancient plants. When it burned, it filled the house with thick smoke but precious heat. The smell was earthy, almost sweet, a comfort learned by generations. Inside the village, children gather, kindling broomsticks, reeds, even bits of broken furniture. Nothing is wasted. The mother scrapes the last bits of soot from the cooking pot, saving it to mix with oil for lamp fuel. Every part of the home contributes to warmth. Even ashes from the hearth are reused to scrub pots or mix into plaster for insulation. This is a world where heat is currency and nothing that burns is ever thrown away. A fascinating practice mentioned in local chronicles involves drying seaweed along coastal villages to use as fuel. It burned with a harsh, salty odor, but it was abundant. Inland, some communities pressed bundles of heather or furs together for the same purpose. The creativity born of necessity made every landscape its own furnace. You return to the cottage carrying a small bundle of sticks. Inside, the air feels stale, but warmer than outside. The mother tends the fire. Careful and precise, she adds the thinnest branches, first coaxing the flame before placing the thicker logs. Smoke fills the room again, rising lazily toward the hole in the roof. The family watches it with quiet relief, as if the light itself means safety. Even in their poverty, peasants respected fire as a living thing. Many believed that it disliked quarrels or curses spoken nearby. If tempers flared, someone might murmur, "Peace, or the flame will die." It was half superstition, half truth. Fires did falter in still air, and harmony, like dry wood, helped them breathe. You can feel that old reverence in the way the family moves, silent and deliberate, treating the hearth as both tool and spirit. Later, as night falls again, the father brings in one last log. The wood is damp and heavy, but it hisses to life when placed on the coals. The smell of sap fills the room. The children press close to the warmth, their faces pink in the glow. This small victory over cold feels monumental. Outside, frost hardens the ground again. Inside, the rhythm of survival continues: gather, burn, rest. Repeat. An old village saying comes to mind: better smoke than silence. It meant that where there was fire, there was life. Even the coughing, the soot, the endless search for fuel, all of it proved existence. You can almost hear that wisdom in the crackle of the wood, the steady beat of the flame. You sit quietly, letting the warmth creep into your bones. The smell of peat and pine mixes in the air, heavy but comforting. The world outside has gone black and only the fire's pulse breaks the dark. For a moment you think of how many generations have done this same thing, tending, watching, waiting. Before central heating, warmth was not steady or silent. It was earned hour by hour, through labor and resourcefulness. Every ember represented effort, every breath of smoke a reminder that nothing came freely. The peasants' lives were built on these small acts of persistence, shaping an endurance as ancient as flame itself. You close your eyes listening to the faint pop of sap in the wood. The room smells alive, smoky, and strong. The fire's light sways gently across the walls, turning the rough cottage into something almost holy. Outside, winter keeps its grip, but in here, for now, warmth holds its fragile ground. The forest beyond the village looks peaceful, but it holds danger. You follow the father again as he moves deeper among the trees, his breath coming out in quick white bursts. The crunch of frost beneath his boots echoes like cracking glass. Every step here is careful. To cut wood or gather brush without the Lord's permission could bring punishment. Yet the cold does not care for laws, and men must choose between freezing and breaking rules. Charcoal burners work nearby, half hidden by smoke. They are solitary figures, faces blackened with soot, tending slow, burning piles of wood covered with turf and earth. You can smell it before you see it, a heavy, rich odor that clings to everything. Charcoal burns hotter and cleaner than raw wood, making it valuable for blacksmiths and kitchens alike. But it is also dangerous work done far from home in the forest's heart. According to old guild records, charcoal burners were both respected and feared. They understood fire better than most. Controlling it without flame, their craft seemed half magic, half skill. A pile too tightly packed would smother too loose, and it would burst into flames. The result was a black treasure, lightweight, powerful fuel that could turn iron red and bread golden. A strange detail from folklore mentions that charcoal burners were sometimes seen as outcasts or wanderers. They lived apart, sleeping in huts of branches, their skin always dusted black. Children whispered that they spoke with spirits of the forest or with fire itself. In some regions they were even believed to bring luck to those who greeted them kindly. The line between superstition and respect blurred easily in a world so dependent on their work. Not all historians agree on how harsh the forest laws truly were. Some argue that lords enforced them fiercely to protect their hunting grounds, punishing peasants who gathered even fallen wood. Others believe many local agreements allowed villagers limited rights to collect fuel and graze animals. The evidence varies by place and time, but one thing remains clear: the forest was both lifeline and trap. You walk with the father as he glances around checking for signs of the reeve or the forester. He carries only a small hatchet, quick to hide if someone appears. He kneels and gathers, sticks his hands red from cold. The sound of chopping is soft, almost apologetic, as if he hopes the trees themselves will not notice. Each branch cut feels like both theft and prayer. He ties his bundle tightly and starts back. The path is narrow, winding through the shadowed wood in the stillness. You hear only crows calling overhead. The cold here feels thicker, heavier, as though the trees themselves are keeping watch somewhere behind you. A charcoal mound smolders quietly, its smoke curling into the pale sky. The smell follows you long after you leave the forest. By the time you return to the village, the man's shoulders sag under the weight of wood. Yet there is relief in his eyes. This small bundle means warmth for another night. He drops it by the cottage door, wipes his brow and steps inside where the fire waits like an old friend. Inside, the family moves quickly. The children bring the smallest twigs to rekindle the embers. The mother thanks her husband without words. The fire catches and the room fills again with light and sound. Every spark feels precious, every flicker hard-earned. One practical custom recorded in medieval law codes required villagers to bring a tithe of gathered wood to their lord or local monastery. In return, they might receive permission to collect branches freely. For a time it was a fragile system of trade built on trust and necessity. Yet many ignored it, especially in bitter winters. Survival has always made rebels of ordinary people. You sit again near the fire and think of the world outside the dark woods, the unseen watchers, the silent laws written by those who never felt this cold. The family's firewood hisses and snaps, scenting the air with pine and ash. The sound is small but it feels like defiance. The father glances at the door as if expecting someone. Old habits of fear never leave quickly. But no one comes. The village sleeps, each home hiding its quiet lawbreakers and its secret fires. Warmth here is an act of courage. A curious fact preserved in some folk songs is that villagers often thank the forest aloud when gathering wood. Bless the branch that burns, they would say. It was both gratitude and superstition, a reminder that taking life from nature required respect. The rhythm of that belief runs through every motion, the swing of an axe, the lift of a log, the breath before the first spark catches outside, the smoke from a dozen hearths rises into the cold night. Each trail of gray threads upward, joining the sky in a soft drifting haze. It is the only movement in the frozen air, proof that life persists behind every wall of wee and dorm. Inside you feel the warmth. Reach your hands again. The flame dances, bright and golden, its light painting the room in colors of honey and soot. The father closes his eyes for a moment, exhausted but content. Tomorrow he will go back to the forest. The laws will still stand, the cold will still bite, and he will still cut wood. Because in this world, warmth is not just comfort, it is defiance, persistence, and faith in the next dawn. Steam rises faintly from the pot near the hearth and the room smells faintly of herbs and smoke. You watch as the mother pours warm water into a small basin, testing it with her wrist before calling her youngest child over. The water is barely above body temperature, but it is enough to wash a face, hands, and feet. A full bath is rare here, reserved for special days or sickness. In the world before central heating, water itself could be both a blessing and a burden. To bathe in the Middle Ages was not as simple as it sounds. Heating enough water took time and fuel, both precious commodities. Historical records and household manuals describe how peasants usually washed only parts of the body rather than immersing fully. Faces, hands and feet were the focus, with linen cloths used to wipe away dirt. Complete baths might happen a few times a year, often before major feasts like Easter or Christmas. Even then they were brief, cold and practical. The family's wooden tub, tucked into a corner near the fire, looks more like a small barrel than a bath. It is filled with water carried by hand from the nearby stream, then warmed over the hearth. The mother kneels and scrubs the child, gently humming softly. The steam fogs the air, and for a moment the scent of smoke mingles with the clean smell of soapwort, a plant used as a natural cleanser. The child giggles, splashing a little. For a few minutes the world feels softer. A curious habit recorded in several medieval texts tells of families sharing the same bath water, oldest to youngest, to save heat and effort. The saying, "Don't throw the baby out with the bath water," likely comes from this practice. By the time the youngest washed, the water had turned murky, but warmth mattered more than cleanliness. You can picture the laughter, the teasing, and the weary contentment of the last one stepping in, knowing it was still a small luxury. Not all scholars agree on how often peasants truly bathed. Some argue that medieval people valued cleanliness more than the later myths suggest, while others believe washing was rare due to the fear of cold and illness. In truth, habits varied by region and season. In warm months, streams and ponds offered relief, while in winter, washing indoors was cautious and minimal. The act of staying dry was often considered safer than risking a chill. The church also shaped ideas about bathing. Some clergy warned that excessive washing encouraged vanity or sin. Yet monastic rules required frequent handwashing and bathing for health. Ordinary people balanced between moral advice and practical comfort. Cleanliness was tied not to perfume or presentation but to well-being and modesty. You watch as the mother wrings out a cloth and hands it to her husband. He wipes his face, sighing as the warmth touches his skin. His hands are cracked from work, his nails rimmed with dirt. The water turns dark almost instantly. Still, his eyes close for a moment in relief. The sensation of warmth against cold skin is one of life's oldest comforts, no matter the century. A small but charming custom in some villages involved adding herbs or beer to bathe water. Beer, surprisingly, was believed to soften skin, while herbs like rosemary and sage offered fragrance and protection from illness. It must have been a rare treat, the scent of summer leaves rising from winter water. Imagine the brief sweetness of that steam in a world ruled by frost. As the family finishes washing, the water is poured carefully onto the ground. Outside, never wasted, even dirty water could serve to dampen ashes or settle dust. Inside, the floor is wiped, and fresh straw is spread to absorb what remains. The cottage smells faintly of soap, water and smoke, an improvement from the usual damp chill. You think about how different their concept of cleanliness was. To them, it meant the absence of visible grime, not the sterile purity we chase today. It was a kind of order, a respect for the body and for the limited warmth that made washing possible. When clean water froze solid overnight, even the simplest wash became an act of patience and gratitude. An unusual note from a 15th-century herbal describes a peasant remedy for bathing without water. People rubbed themselves with coarse cloth sprinkled with ashes or bran, then brushed it away to remove dirt and oil. It left the skin smooth and slightly scented with smoke. You can imagine the slow, soothing rhythm of that motion. Beside the fire, the glow of embers, soft on bare arms. In the corner the children are drying themselves with rough linen. Their laughter fills the small room. For them even this small ritual feels like luxury. The father stirs the fire again, spreading heat through the space. The room glows, gold and red reflections flickering on damp skin and wool. There is something deeply human in the way they take pleasure from the simplest comfort, a few inches of warm water, a cloth, a moment of rest. Before central heating, before plumbing, warmth was not constant, it was earned. Every splash, every drop of steam was a quiet triumph over the cold world outside. As night deepens, the washed family sits by the fire. Clean enough, warm enough, content, the smell of herbs fades, replaced again by smoke. You feel the calm in the air, the peace that comes not from luxury but from balance, work, warmth and the satisfaction of survival. You glance once more at the wooden tub, now empty, glistening faintly in the firelight. The reflection of flame on water, streaked wood looks almost sacred. In this small cottage, warmth is not endless, but for tonight it is enough. By morning the frost on the windows, oiled cloth, has formed small white feathers of ice. The fire is down to its last red glow and your breath leaves a faint mist in front of your face. The family stirs slowly, the mother rubbing her hands together for warmth before reaching for the kettle. Outside, roosters crow weakly, their calls muffled by fog. The day begins not with comfort but with movement. In the medieval world, warmth often came not from fire but from motion. Work itself was heat. The body became its own furnace, fed by food and effort. Historical notes from monastic journals describe peasants who kept warm by sheer activity, plowing, carrying, spinning or hammering through the coldest months. To stop moving was to let the chill claim you. The father steps outside first, his breath puffing into the air like smoke, he begins to chop wood again, the rhythmic thud echoing through the quiet. The mother kneads bread on the table, her fingers moving quickly through the dough to keep blood flowing. Even the children help. Sweeping the floor, feeding animals, fetching water, every task keeps the heart beating fast enough to chase away the frost. An interesting practice from medieval village life was called warming by work. People often began the day with chores that built heat into the body, hauling water, splitting logs or sweeping. The idea was simple: if your body burned energy early, it stayed warm longer. They might not have known the science, but instinct and experience taught them how to live in harmony with their own metabolism. By midday muscles ache, but the cold feels less cruel. The mother pours small cups of ale, slightly warmed by the fire. It is thick and sweet, more nourishment than drink. Ale was safer than water and its mild alcohol gave a false but pleasant glow. Chroniclers noted that even children drank it daily. It was fuel in liquid form, another way to keep the blood moving. There is some debate among historians about whether medieval ale truly made people warm or simply dulled their awareness of cold. Modern science tells us that alcohol widens blood vessels, bringing a rush of heat that quickly fades. But for people living in stone cottages with open hearths, even a few minutes of false warmth might have been worth the price. You take a sip yourself, feeling its coarse texture and faint bitterness. The warmth spreads across your chest slow but sure. Around you, laughter begins to fill the room. The children sing a short silly rhyme about fire and frost, while the parents share a look of quiet relief. This is how people in cold centuries found joy, not through abundance, but through small shared moments of reprieve. A curious little custom mentioned in old tavern records describes how villagers stomped their feet and clapped their hands before taking their first sip of ale, a symbolic act to wake the blood. Taverns themselves were as much about warmth as drink. The hearth at their center glowed like a beacon on winter nights, and travelers would gather there shoulder to shoulder, trading stories, singing songs and soaking in communal heat. You imagine stepping into one now. The air would be thick, with laughter, pipe smoke and the smell of roasting meat. Wooden mugs clatter against the table and someone tunes a lute near the fire. The room glows red and golden, each face flushed, each hand gripping warmth, even if the ale was weak and the fire small. The atmosphere itself became a second kind of heat, the warmth of being surrounded by voices and song. Some chroniclers wrote that villagers believed ale strengthened the spirit. It was not about intoxication but endurance. A warm drink at the right moment restored courage. The same idea lives on in the way modern people reach for coffee or tea in winter mornings. The ritual of drinking something hot, of feeling the steam touch the face, remains a deeply human comfort. You return to the cottage. The family's meal is ready now, coarse bread, cheese and a bit of ale to wash it down. The father eats in silence, eyes half closed from fatigue. The mother hums while cleaning bowls. The children giggle at something. Only they understand. The air inside feels warmer now, not from fire alone but from the rhythm of bodies, working, eating, laughing. Later, as dusk begins to fall, the villagers head to the small tavern near the center of the settlement. You follow hearing the distant sound of song. The building is crowded and the hearth burns bright. People stand close, mugs in hand, their faces glowing in the firelight. The music is rough but heartfelt. A man plays a fiddle, others clap along, someone tells a story about a fox stealing bread, and laughter fills the room. The warmth here is not measured in degrees, but in connection. An unexpected benefit of such gatherings was social healing. Medieval doctors believed that cheer and companionship restored vitality. Whether through song, ale or shared work, happiness itself was seen as a kind of medicine. The tavern, the bakehouse, the fields, all were places where laughter and labor kept people alive. You step outside again later, cheeks flushed and hands still warm. The air bites sharply, but your body holds the echo of movement and drink. Frost crunches beneath your boots. As you head home, the sky is clear, and the stars sparkle like frost scattered across black velvet. You breathe deeply and for once the cold feels less cruel. Inside the cottage, the fire has been rekindled. The smell of ale and smoke lingers in the air. You sit down, hands stretched toward the flame, and realize that the warmth of this world is layered. Fire, work, food, drink and laughter, each feeding the other in a life without central heating. These small human rituals stitched comfort together out of effort and grace. The next day dawns dim and cold, a thin veil of fog rolling over the fields. The frost clings to the hedges like silver thread. Inside the cottage, the fire burns slowly, and the mother sits by the hearth crushing herbs in a small wooden bowl. The air fills with sharp, pleasant scents, mint, sage and a touch of rosemary. These are not for cooking, but for warding off sickness and easing the cold that settles deep in bones. In a world without modern medicine or central heating, the fight against cold was as much spiritual as physical. People learned to battle winter with plants, prayers and imagination. Historical herbal guides from the late Middle Ages list dozens of remedies for chills, coughs and winter humors. Garlic boiled in ale was said to warm the blood, and elderflower tea was believed to chase away frost from the lungs. You can almost taste the mixture now, bitter, smoky and oddly soothing. The mother stirs her concoction with care, humming softly. The father coughs beside the fire, pulling his cloak tighter. The sound echoes through the small room. Harsh and familiar illness was an old companion of winter. The combination of damp air, smoke and poor diet made coughs and fevers. Common survival often depended on what knowledge the family could gather from herbs and memory. A curious practice mentioned in old folk records involves tying dried herbs into small bundles and hanging them above the hearth. The rising smoke was thought to draw their power into the air, creating a charm against sickness. Sometimes salt or bread was added to the bundle, symbols of preservation and life. Even skeptics of magic found comfort in the ritual, a reminder that any action meant hope. Scholars still argue about how much of this herbal knowledge was effective. Some remedies, like garlic or thyme, have real antibacterial properties. Others, such as charms of nettles or ash twigs, worked only through faith. But perhaps faith itself held healing power. When the night stretched endlessly and the cold crept into every joint, belief could keep despair at bay. The father sips from a steaming cup the mother hands him. The liquid is dark and smells of honey and spice. It burns his throat on the way down, but he smiles weakly afterward. The warmth spreads slowly from chest to fingertips. These home briars were part medicine, part ritual, each family's recipe handed down through generations. Some called them warming draughts. They often mixed herbs, ale and a bit of sugar or lard thickening into something. Halfway between drink and meal you notice a small wooden charm nailed above the door, a circle of twigs tied with red thread. The mother touches it briefly while muttering a few words under her breath. The gesture is simple, automatic, comforting. Across Europe, such charms were said to protect homes from the winter sickness, a vague term covering everything from colds to fevers to bad luck. Even the church tolerated these customs, for faith and superstition often lived side by side. An intriguing record from a monastery infirmary describes monks rubbing mustard and vinegar on their feet to call the heat downward. The same practice spread among peasants, who believed that warming the feet could revive the entire body. You imagine the sting of vinegar on cold skin, the strange relief it might bring after hours in frozen fields. In an age without heating, people understood the body as a landscape of its own, capable of kindling small fires if treated right. As the morning light grows, the children join their mother tying herbs together for drying. The air fills with soft rustles and the faint sweetness of plants. The smell almost erases the harsh scent of smoke. Their small hands move quickly, mimicking motions they have seen since birth. Knowledge here is not written. It is remembered in muscle and rhythm. A curious tidbit from old folk songs tells how people believed certain plants carried personalities. Sage was brave, rosemary faithful and mint cheerful. When mixed in a drink, they lent these qualities to the one who drank it. In that sense, healing was as much about emotion as about body. A strong spirit, they said, made a strong fire inside. Outside, frost still glimmers on the ground. Inside, the warmth now carries a fragrance of life rather than soot. The family moves slowly, content for the moment. The father's coughing eases. The mother smiles faintly as she places another bundle of herbs near the fire to dry. The crackling flames reflect in her eyes, steady and sure. You realize that in this world warmth and health are bound together. A healthy body is a warmer one, and every remedy is a kind of invitation for heat to return. Whether through tea, steam or charm, people learned to coax life back into their limbs. It was not science as we know it, but it was care, constant and devoted. By evening, the herbs hang like small green ghosts above the hearth. Their shadows dance on the wall with the fire light. The cottage smells of smoke and thyme, comfort and endurance. The air feels almost lighter now, touched by something gentler than before. You sit quietly, breathing in the mixture of warmth and scent. Somewhere outside, an owl calls low and distant. The night is long again, but it no longer feels menacing. It feels watched over, protected by both fire and faith. The mother places a final sprig of rosemary near the flame and whispers something you can't quite hear. Perhaps it is a prayer, perhaps a promise. The warmth deepens and the night, for once, feels kind. The fire burns low, glowing gently through the thin mist of smoke that drifts near the roof. The night is quiet, and the only sounds are the soft breathing of sleepers and the distant bark of a dog outside. Yet in this calm there is an unspoken truth. Every villager knows, winter is not gentle with the weak. The cold does not only numb fingers and stiffen joints, it steals quietly from the young and the old. You watch as the mother checks her youngest child, tucking the blanket close beneath the chin. The baby's cheeks are rosy, but the air bites at any skin left uncovered. She presses her hand to the child's chest, feeling the slow rise and fall, and exhales softly in relief. The fire may fade through the night, but her watchfulness will not. Historical accounts from parish records tell of winter as both a season and a test. Death visited most often in these months, slipping into homes where fuel ran low or food had run out. Infants and elders were especially vulnerable. Whole families would sometimes wake to find one member still and pale beside them, the cold, having finished what hunger began. It is a grim truth, yet it deepens the tenderness of every small act of care. The mother rises, stirring the embers to life again. The faint crackle fills the silence. Sparks leap upward and fall back into the ashes. She blows softly until a flame catches its orange glow, spreading like dawn across the faces of her children. That small fire means another hour of safety. One poignant record from a medieval diary speaks of mothers sleeping lightly through winter nights, waking again and again to check their children's breathing. They would cover them with extra straw or pull them closer to share body heat. Warmth was not measured by the fire alone, but by the closeness of skin, the exchange of breath, the reassurance that life still pulsed beside you. Some scholars debate how much people feared death in such times, arguing that the constant presence of mortality made it strangely ordinary. Others believe that each loss struck as deeply then as it would today, though mourning was shorter. Out of necessity, grief had to fit inside survival. The living still needed to fetch water, tend animals and cut wood. Even as sorrow lingered in the background, the father stirs in his sleep, murmuring something indistinct. The mother returns to her place, beside him, drawing the blanket over both their shoulders. Their eldest child shifts closer, seeking warmth. The air hums softly with their breathing, a fragile symphony of endurance. A lesser-known folk custom from northern villages involved placing warm stones wrapped in cloth beside sleeping infants. These were called bed guardians. They cooled slowly through the night, tricking the body into believing the world was kind. The parents knew it was not, but they offered the illusion anyway. That kind of care is what kept people human through the cold. Outside, the wind rises again, the cottage cars. Snow slips from the thatch in heavy clumps. The world beyond the walls feels immense, white and merciless. Yet inside, the warmth of shared life makes the small space glow with invisible light. You think of the elderly in the village, those who can no longer work as they once did. In the cold months they rely on others for survival. Younger neighbors bring them firewood or scraps of food in return. The old offer stories, blessings or the simple presence of memory. To care for them is not charity but tradition, a way of repaying wisdom and keeping continuity alive. An old saying from a medieval proverb collection reads, "He who warms the old warms his own soul." It is not just moral instruction, but live truth. When the cold could take anyone, compassion itself became a shield. Every shared ember, every cup of broth was both kindness and insurance against fate's indifference. The air in the cottage feels heavy now, full of warmth and fatigue. The children dream. The fire flickers and the smell of smoke and straw fills your lungs. You feel a kind of stillness that belongs only to those who have survived. Another night at dawn, frost coats the inside of the door like lace. The mother pushes it open with care, letting the pale light spill. In the village is quiet, save for the cry of a rooster and the faint ring of a distant bell. Another day has arrived, another fragile victory. She steps outside, breath misting, and looks toward the churchyard where small mounds of snow mark graves from winters past. Her gaze lingers there for a moment, then turns back to the cottage. The living must move forward. She wipes her hands on her apron and goes inside to wake the others. The father stretches and smiles faintly at her. The children stir, yawning, rubbing their eyes. The fire is rekindled, breakfast begun, life continues, steady and tender. The cold remains, but it no longer feels as sharp. The family's warmth, though small, is stubborn. You sit near the hearth again and feel the heat rise. Outside, the frost gleams like glass, beautiful and cruel. Inside, the world smells of bread and smoke. The balance between loss and life holds. Delicate but enduring. It is not comfort, but it is grace earned, one morning at a time. The morning sun climbs slowly, spreading thin light across the snow. The village feels quieter than usual, but there is a sense of anticipation in the air. It is midwinter, the time when darkness begins its slow retreat and even the poorest homes prepare for something sacred. The family gathers around the hearth, their movements filled with purpose. The smell of baking fills the room, mingled with the sharp sweetness of burning pine. Today is the festival of fire and light. Medieval peasants lived by the rhythm of the church calendar, but beneath that rhythm lingered older, deeper traditions. In many places, midwinter was marked by use or mandala celebrations that mixed Christian devotion with ancient hope for the sun's return. When night stretched too long, people kindled extra flames to call light back into the world. You can feel that yearning in the way the family prepares, laying fresh straw, sweeping the floor and polishing the small iron candlestick that holds their only candle. The father steps outside and returns with a bundle of green branches. He hangs them above the door where they rustle faintly in the draught. Holly, ivy, and pine, symbols of endurance. Their scent fills the cottage, sharp and clean, as if the forest itself has stepped inside to bless the hearth. The children clap softly, excited by the change in routine. Even in hardship, ritual brings joy. A curious detail from village records shows that peasants often saved one special log from the previous year's use fire. This blessed log was dried carefully and burned at the start of the next winter. Its embers believed to protect the home for the year ahead. The family here follows the same custom. The father places the darkened piece of wood at the edge of the fire, whispering a few quiet words. The flames catch slowly and for a moment the air seems to glow. With more than heat, it carries hope. Some historians suggest that these winter festivals were less about religion than about survival of the spirit. When days barely lasted 8 hours and nights seemed endless, people needed reminders that light would return. Others see in them echoes of pagan sun rituals woven seamlessly into Christian life. Whatever their origins, the purpose was the same: to lift hearts against the weight of cold and darkness. As the fire brightens, neighbors begin to arrive, each carrying a small offering. One brings a loaf of bread, another offers a jug of ale. They settle near the hearth, their laughter filling the small room. Soon music begins, a fiddle, a hand drum, the soft thump of boots on the floor. The rhythm feels ancient, a heartbeat shared by everyone present. The fire responds, crackling in time. An old chronicle describes how villagers in parts of England and France danced in circles during these winter feasts, each person holding a candle or torch. The dance symbolized the turning of the sun, the promise of rebirth. Here, inside the smoky cottage, you can almost see that same light flicker in their faces. The children twirl with simple joy, their shadows jumping along the walls like spirits of warmth. A curious little custom often included burning herbs such as rosemary or bay in the fire to purify the air and bless the home. The mother tosses a handful into the flames and a fresh scent rises. Crisp and sweet smoke curls upward like incense, mingling with laughter. For a few precious hours this humble space feels transformed. The walls seem to pulse with light and life. As evening falls, candles are lit throughout the village. Their tiny flames flicker in windows shining through oiled cloth or horn panes. From outside, the settlement looks like a constellation scattered across the snow. Each point of light represents not just a household, but a prayer that spring will come, that warmth will return, that all who sit around the fire tonight will live to see the thaw. There are stories told now, old tales carried through generations. One speaks of the kindling woman, a spirit who walks from house to house on the longest night, blessing the hearths that burn bright. Another tells of birds that carry stolen fire to the Sunday. These tales are half memory, half comfort, reminding people that warmth and light are never truly lost. Not everyone celebrates in cheer. For some, the festival is quiet, a time to remember those who did not survive the winter. The villagers visit the church before night fully falls, lighting candles for the departed inside that cold stone building. The tiny flames flicker like stars. The air smells of wax and smoke, the same scent that fills every cottage. Light binds them all together, both in mourning and in hope. Back in the home, the family sits in content silence. The father sips ale, his face flushed from heat and drink. The mother hums softly while darning a sock. The children lie on the floor near the fire, eyes heavy but smiling. Outside, faint music drifts through the night from neighboring houses. It mingles with the wind and becomes something timeless, a hymn of endurance. You look at the fire and realize how deeply light ruled their world. Without it, there was no warmth, no safety, no joy. To protect and celebrate it was to honor life itself. In a way, these mid-winter festivals were humanity's first act of gratitude, a collective whisper into the dark. We are still here. The flames dance higher, throwing sparks into the smoky air. You feel their warmth on your face and hear the faint hum of voices around you. The night outside is cold, but inside this small room the fire burns like a promise. It is the same promise that carried generations through endless winters, the belief that after darkness, light always returns. The fire has burned down to soft orange embers and the room feels calm again. After the laughter of the festival, you stretch your legs toward the faint heat and notice the quiet invention scattered through the space, small tricks the family has built over time to steal warmth from the air. Every home has its secrets for surviving winter, clever ideas passed down like heirlooms. The mother reaches for a smooth, round stone near the hearth. She wraps it in cloth and places it at the foot of the children's bed. The little ones sigh happily as the heat seeps through. Warm stones gathered from the fire and, swaddled in linen, were the peasants' version of hot water bottles. They held their heat for hours, turning a cold bed into something almost luxurious. Next she draws the bed curtains closed. The fabric is rough wool, patched many times, but when pulled tight it traps the family's warmth inside their sleeping space. In the flickering light the curtain glows like the inside of a lantern. Such curtains were common even in modest homes. Hung from ropes or wooden frames around shared beds, they created small chambers of still air, a simple but effective shield against drafts. Historical records and surviving bed frames from rural cottages reveal how practical this design was. Beds were often built into the wall itself, forming enclosed bed boxes that mimicked the safety of a cocoon. It was warmth by architecture, a human attempt to make shelter within shelter. You can imagine crawling into that dark little space, the scent of wool and straw around you, and feeling the world shrink to a gentle living warmth. A curious practice mentioned in regional chronicles tells of peasants placing candles inside small clay lanterns near their feet. At night the flame, safely enclosed, gave off more heat than light. Combined with the curtain and the warmth of bodies, it could raise the temperature within that small enclosure just enough to chase away the sharpest chill. You can almost picture the soft flicker glowing through the curtains, we've a tiny sun keeping watch over sleeping faces. Not all historians agree on how widespread these small comforts were. Some insist they were luxuries of better-off peasants, while others believe every family developed their own versions using whatever materials they had. What is clear is that human ingenuity thrived where need was greatest. Survival was not just labor, it was creativity practiced daily. On the shelf near the fire sits a small clay pot covered with a wooden lid. Inside is a mixture of salt and ashes. The father uses it to dry damp gloves and shoes, pressing the fabric against its warm surface. It absorbs moisture, leaving behind the faint scent of smoke and minerals. This trick, simple yet effective, saves hours of discomfort in a world where wet feet could lead to sickness. Another item catches your eye, a metal hook hanging near the fire with a wooden dish suspended from it. The dish holds broth that slowly warms from the rising heat. It is not cooking but conserving energy using every ounce of warmth already present. The peasants learned to treat heat itself like treasure, never letting it go unused. A lesser-known fact from domestic records is that people sometimes placed mirrors or polished metal near the hearth to reflect light deeper into the room. Even a single flicker could make the space feel brighter and, by illusion, warmer. The idea of multiplying warmth through reflection feels poetic, as if they were trying to stretch comfort by imagination alone. The mother now adjusts a small wooden screen she has set near the door. It blocks the draft that always slips through the uneven frame. The air inside steadies immediately. She smiles faintly, satisfied. Every movement she makes seems born of generations of trial and wisdom, a dance perfected by necessity. A charming detail from old letters between villages describes people heating their bed sheets before sleep by holding them briefly over the fire. The trick required care to avoid burns, but the result was heavenly, a momentary burst of warmth. As one slipped beneath the covers, you can almost feel that rush of heat fading slowly into comfort. The family settles again as night deepens. The curtains are drawn, the stones tucked close, the fire watched carefully, the air hums with quiet satisfaction. For all its poverty, the cottage feels ingenious, its inhabitants masters of the art of making enough. You realize that this inventiveness is a kind of intelligence shaped by hardship. Where modern life gives constant warmth, there's demanded constant awareness of draft, of fuel, of small miracles like heated stones and candlelight. Every evening was an experiment, every success a story worth passing down. Outside, frost glints beneath a pale moon. Inside, a single candle flickers through the bed curtain's folds. Its faint light trembles across the room, brushing the walls like a living breath. The family sleeps close, safe in the warmth they have built with hands and patience. You listen to the faint pop of embers and feel the stillness settle over the cottage. The tricks may be simple, but they are elegant in their own way. Each one is a reminder that comfort is not born from abundance but from imagination. In the hush of winter, these quiet acts of cleverness glow as brightly as any modern fire. Morning light creeps across the sky in soft gray strokes. The frost on the ground glitters and the world feels clean. But brittle smoke curls gently from every chimney in the village, each line of it, marking a life, a family, a small victory against the cold. You walk through the narrow lane and hear the muffled sounds of labor behind wooden walls. Winter still holds its grip, but people move as if they can sense spring, waiting somewhere beyond the horizon. Inside the cottage, the family is already awake. The father repairs a wooden plow, his knife scraping against the wood in steady rhythm. The mother mends a wool cloak by the fire, the needle glinting in the morning light. The children sought dried beans at the table, their chatter soft but bright. It is a simple scene, but it hums with purpose. Every task, every motion pushes back against stillness, the great enemy of warmth. In the medieval world, preparation was the best defense against winter. Historical records from memorial rolls and household accounts show how families used the cold months to repair tools, patch roofs and spin new cloth. Work continued even when the soil was frozen. It was not merely survival, it was the quiet building of future comfort. You glance at the mother's hands, quick and confident, as she sews. Her thread moves through thick fabric, leaving neat small stitches. The cloak she repairs will protect her husband from snow and rain. In every stitch there is affection disguised as necessity. Warmth was love translated into labor. A curious note in a 15th-century domestic manual mentions that peasants often lined their cloaks with worn linen or fur scraps from old garments. It was recycling, before the word existed. Even bits of rabbit skin or sheep skin were precious, turning coarse cloth into insulation against the bitter wind. You can almost feel the texture beneath your fingers, rough on the outside, soft within, carrying the faint scent of earth and smoke. Not all historians agree on how self-sufficient peasants truly were. Some argue that dependence on manurial systems left them with little freedom to innovate. Others point to evidence of remarkable skill and resilience, families who built, mended, and invented within the narrow boundaries of their world. Perhaps both are right. Necessity often breeds the kind of independence that laws cannot erase. Outside you hear the rhythmic sound of a hammer. The blacksmith's forge glows like a second sun. At the edge of the village, sparks leap into the air as iron meets iron. The warmth there is fierce and fleeting, born from fire that serves everyone. Villagers come to mend tools, trade small goods and talk. Even in winter the forge is a gathering place, both practical and social. A detail from guild records describes how blacksmiths were considered keepers of the village's warmth. They worked with flame daily, shaping not just metal but hope. Their fires lit the hearts of communities where most homes could barely stay above freezing. You can almost hear the ring of the hammer as it echoes through the cold morning, carrying a rhythm older than language itself. Back in the cottage, the mother hangs her finished cloak on a wooden peg. The father inspects his mended plow and nods with quiet satisfaction. The children help sweep the floor, brushing dust into the hearth's ashes. This cleanliness, small as it seems, holds meaning. To order their surroundings is to claim control in a world where so little can be controlled. A curious custom found in village folklore tells that families who kept their hearth clean would have luck in spring planting. Ashes were seen as a blessing if scattered over fields. When the thaw began, the logic was simple: what gave warmth in winter would give life in spring. Fire fed the soil as it had fed the home. The day passes slowly, filled with motion. The family carries hay to the animals, sharp frost biting at their cheeks. They check the thatch for loose patches, patching holes with bundles of straw. Each task is performed with quiet precision. There is little talk, only breath and rhythm. Yet beneath it all hums a subtle anticipation: winter cannot last forever. As the sun begins to sink, the light turns golden, spreading across the snow like spilled honey. Inside the cottage, the father stirs the fire to life again. The room glows, familiar and comforting. The mother sets a pot to boil while the children gather near her knees waiting for stories. One of the oldest winter traditions in Europe was storytelling by the fire, without books or clocks. The spoken word carried history, faith and imagination through generations. The tales changed slightly with each telling, but always carried the same warmth. Tonight she tells of Saint Bridge and her eternal flame, a light that never went out, guarded through every storm. The children listen wide-eyed, the flickering fire reflected in their faces. The father smiles quietly, gazing into the embers. The story of an undying flame feels true at this moment. Around him, warmth fills every corner with the room, earned through labor, preserved through care and shared without measure. Outside, the village grows still again. Smoke rises in gentle columns and frost begins to creep back over the fields. Inside, the family sits together, the fire crackling softly, the world reduced to light, laughter and peace. You feel the rhythm of their lives settling into your own breathing. Every day they fight the same cold, perform the same tasks, and yet each evening ends in the same small victory. The lesson is simple but profound: warmth is not something given. It is made over and over by human hands and human hearts. Night returns, clear and cold, the kind of night where frost forms before the stars even settle. The wind hums low outside, brushing against the thatch like a slow breath. Inside, the family is gathered close around the hearth once more. The fire glows brighter than usual tonight and a thin trail of sparks curls upward through the smoke hole. The smell of pine and ash fills the room, mingling with the faint sweetness of roasting apples. This evening is for rest. The work of the day has been done, and the family allows themselves a rare moment of ease. The father leans back on the bench, boots off, his hands stretched toward the fire. The mother mends nothing tonight. Instead, she hums a tune so old no one remembers its first singer. The children lie on their stomachs, whispering stories to one another. It is quiet, but it is a warm kind of quiet, the kind that feels earned. For medieval peasants, rest was not leisure but recovery. Records from parish sermons and local chronicles reveal that even the church understood the necessity of stillness. Days of work were measured by the body's limits, and winter nights like this were moments to gather strength for what waited beyond the frost. You can almost feel it now, the kind of exhaustion that soothes rather than drains the satisfaction of having survived another day. A curious detail found in household writings mentions that people believed certain nights of deep frost carried a special silence. They said even the spirits of the forest slept, then their voices frozen in the air. The stillness outside the cottage feels just like that, heavy and perfect. You could almost imagine the world pausing to listen. The father pokes the fire gently, watching the sparks jump and fade. He tells a quiet story about his youth when the river froze so thick that people danced on it under the moonlight. His voice is slow and steady, carrying the rhythm of remembered laughter. The children listen with half-closed eyes, smiling. These simple stories, told without pretense, are the true songs of winter. Historians sometimes wonder whether peasants ever felt happy in lives so hard. Some claim they were too burdened to know joy. Others argue that contentment was not absent but redefined. Perhaps happiness was smaller than found in warmth, full bellies, and laughter that rose from the glow of a single fire. Listening to the quiet hum in this cottage, it seems the second view rings truer. The mother passes around pieces of baked apple, soft and steaming, sprinkled with what little honey remains. The scent fills the room like a promise of spring. A small luxury, yes, but one that carries more comfort than any banquet. Each bite is savored slowly and the children's smiles glow like the coals in the hearth. A curious custom from rural villages involved making fire offerings on cold nights like this. A few crumbs of food or drops of ale were tossed into the fire as thanks to the spirits of warmth, whether the family here believes in such things or not. The father lifts his cup slightly toward the flames before drinking. It is half gesture, half gratitude. In a world so uncertain, even the smallest rituals matter. The air inside grows hazy with smoke, but no one minds. The smell has become a kind of perfume, woven into their clothes, their hair, their memories. It is the scent of home itself. Outside, the wind sharpens for a moment, rattling the shutters, then fades again. The family does not stir. They know that the world beyond these walls is cold and endless, but within this circle of light they are safe. The mother hums again, her voice low and soft. It is a lullaby now, one learned from her own mother and perhaps from generations before that. The words are simple, something about the fire's light guiding the soul through darkness. Her voice mingles with the crackle of wood, creating a sound both fragile and eternal. A record from an old French chronicle notes that songs sung by firelight often carried dual meanings, part comfort, part prayer. They were not meant only for children, but for everyone listening. The melody told the body to rest and the heart to endure. In this small room you feel the truth of that. The song itself seems to warm the air. Each note a soft flame. The father closes his eyes, first lulled by the music. The children follow soon after, their breathing slowing, their small bodies curling near the hearth. The mother stays awake a little longer, staring into the fire. The flames reflect in her eyes, shifting gold and red. She stirs the embers once more, not out of need but habit, the way one touches the shoulder of a friend before saying good night. She whispers something, perhaps a prayer, perhaps a simple word of thanks, and the sound vanishes into the smoke. The fire sighs content and settles into its steady rhythm. Outside, the stars gleam coldly over the dark roofs. Inside, warmth glows steady as a heartbeat. You can almost hear the two worlds speaking to each other, the vast silence of the frozen sky answering the soft murmur of human life. And here, in the middle of the long winter, you understand something essential: warmth is not only heat or fire. It is a kind of courage, a quiet defiance of everything that tries to freeze the human spirit. It is this, the shared story, the soft song, the small flame that keeps the world alive until morning. Dawn breaks pale and slow, with the first light seeping through the oiled cloth window like watered milk. The fire has burned down to faint embers again, but the air in the cottage holds the warmth of the night before you rise quietly and notice the world outside wrapped in silence. The snow glows faintly blue, untouched except for the small tracks of birds and the faint path leading to the well. Everything seems asleep, yet everything endures. Winter mornings in a medieval village always began with sound. The soft thud of feet on frozen ground, the creak of buckets, the faint clinking of tools. You step outside and hear it all blending into a gentle rhythm. Smoke curls from the chimneys slow and steady. A rooster calls once, its voice carrying over the frost. It feels as though the whole village is exhaling together, ready to begin another day. Inside, the family moves in quiet coordination. The father wraps his cloak tightly, preparing to visit the fields, though the soil is still hard as stone. The mother sweeps near the hearth and scatters the ashes into a small wooden bucket. She will save them to mix with lye for soap. Nothing in this world goes unused, not even what the fire leaves behind. The children feed the animals, their laughter ringing softly through the chill. A record from monastic journals describes ashes as the housekeeper's blessing. They were used to cleaning, to make soap and to enrich the soil when spring arrived. In this way, even what seemed spent was still part of the cycle of warmth. Fire, it seemed, never truly ended. It only changed form, passing from heat to soil, to life again. The father steps into the field. Frost crunches beneath his boots and his breath curls like smoke. He kneels to check the ground where the wheat will grow come spring. The earth feels dead now, but he knows it only sleeps. Every year it has returned, and every year he has trusted that it would again. Faith in the turning of the seasons is a kind of warmth too, the steady heat of belief. Historians still debate how much peasants understood about the natural cycles that governed them. Some say their knowledge was instinctive, shaped by experience more than theory. Others argue that their understanding bordered on poetic, seeing in every seed and flame the pulse of divine order. You can feel both truths here, knowledge born from labor and wonder born from faith. The sun rises higher, glinting on the frozen pond. Beyond the cottages, the ice shimmers like glass. Children slide stones across it, laughing when they skid to a stop, their joy cuts through the cold like sunlight through smoke. Watching them, you realize that winter was never only hardship. It also carried moments of play and beauty, small glimmers that reminded people they were alive. A charming detail from medieval letters describes children tying bones or pieces of wood to their shoes to glide over frozen rivers. These early skates were crude but ingenious, and the laughter that followed them was surely universal. Even in the harshest cold, humans found ways to dance with nature instead of merely enduring it. By noon the sun softens the air. The snow on rooftops begins to drip in slow rhythm. The sound is hypnotic, like a clock counting the hours toward spring. Inside the cottage, the mother stirs a pot of porridge, the steam rising in soft ribbons, the smell of oats and milk fills the air, and soon the children return, pink, checked and hungry. They eat quickly, their hands wrapped around wooden bowls to trap every bit of warmth. A curious belief noted in local folklore says that if a family kept their hearth burning through 12 straight days after midwinter, their year would be blessed with Mild weather. The idea likely came from the relief people felt once the worst of winter had passed. The family here follows that tradition, adding a few twigs each time the fire begins to fade. They do it without discussion, the way one tends to a heartbeat. You sit near the hearth again and watch as the flames rise. The sound of wood cracking, the smell of sap, the golden shimmer that plays over the walls, all of it feels both ancient and familiar. This ritual of rekindling connects them not only to their ancestors but to something larger than history. It is the rhythm of all who have ever sought warmth in a cold world. An interesting practice from medieval Scandinavia involved lighting hope candles in midwinter. Thin sticks of tallow burned slowly over the course of the day, symbolizing the lengthening of light. Some families measured progress toward spring by how long the candle lasted. In that gentle glow, time itself became visible and the promise of warmth was made tangible. As the afternoon fades, a faint mist begins to rise from the melting snow. The air smells cleaner now, a hint of thaw mingling with smoke. The family steps outside to breathe it in, faces lifted toward the faint Sunday. They stand in silence for a long time, just feeling the light. After months of darkness, even this weak warmth feels holy. Not all winters ended kindly. Some years frost lingered until late April. But in every heart, hope returned the moment the light shifted. You can see it in their faces now, the quiet relief, the patient endurance rewarded. As evening falls again, the fire burns low, steady and confident. The family eats, prays and settles together as they always have. Yet tonight there is a different note in the air. The world outside is still frozen, but inside the light has changed. You sense it too, that whisper of renewal, fragile but certain. The fire crackles and the mother smiles without speaking. The father closes his eyes listening to the sound of dripping water outside, the first music of a softer world. It is not spring yet, but its breath has arrived. The snow begins to melt in earnest, now retreating in uneven patches across the fields. Mud replaces frost and the air carries the smell of shoring earth. The village feels alive again, though no one says so aloud, as if speaking too early might frighten the warmth away. You stand at the cottage door and breathe deeply. For the first time in months, the air smells not of smoke but of soil and water. It is the scent of life returning inside. The hearth burns gently, more for comfort than survival. The fire is smaller these days, no longer a desperate guardian but a familiar companion. The family still gathers around it each evening, though their work now stretches beyond the walls. The father repairs the wooden yoke for the oxen, the mother scrubs soot from the cooking pots and the children help gather twigs from the damp fields. It feels like preparation for a long-awaited rebirth. In medieval calendars, this turning of the season was marked with ceremonies of thanks. Church bells rang to bless the soil and priests sprinkled holy water over tools and seeds. People believed that warmth had to be invited properly, just as they had once invited light in midwinter. You can picture it now, villagers standing in muddy fields, faces lifted to the weak sun, whispering blessings into the wind. A curious entry in a 16th-century sermon collection records that some priests scolded peasants for celebrating too much the sun and too little the Creator. Yet even they could not stop the old customs. Peasants burned herbs in small fires at field corners to drive out frost spirits, while others buried the ashes of their hearth beneath the soil to feed the earth what had fed the fire. The blend of faith and folklore made spring feel sacred and human all at once. The family's routine changes with the light. The father begins mending fences near the pasture, his breath steady, his movements rhythmic. The mother spins wool by the open door so that the breeze carries away loose fibers. The children chase each other outside, laughing in the puddles. Their cheeks are red, their boots heavy with mud, and their joy fills the air like bird song. After so many months of restraint, the sound feels almost shocking in its freedom. Scholars still debate how medieval peasants viewed the passing of seasons. Some argue that they feared nature's unpredictability, while others believe they felt kinship with it, reading each shift of weather as a message rather than a threat. Watching this family, you can sense that balance, respect mixed with affection. The thaw is not a victory over winter, but a conversation with it, an acknowledgement that both have their time. You kneel beside the hearth where the fire burns low. The ashes are gray and fine, but a few small embers still glow beneath them. The mother stirs them gently, smiling at their persistence. Fire, like the people who kept it, never truly dies. It only changes shape. Soon she will scatter the ashes in the garden and the warmth once held inside the house will pass into the soil. Nothing is lost, only transformed. A curious observation in old farming manual suggests that peasants believed ashes carried the memory of sun and flame. When mixed with seed soil, they gave crops the strength of fire itself. It is poetic, but perhaps not entirely false. Ashes do enrich the earth, returning minerals drawn up from wood. Even the scientific truth feels spiritual when seen through their eyes. By late afternoon, the sun burns bright enough to cast shadows again. The cottage walls, once cold to the touch, now hold a trace of warmth. The children open the door wide and let the air move through. Smoke drifts upward instead of inward and the room clears. The smell of stale winter finally fades, replaced by the faint sweetness of new growth. Outside, the mother takes down the bundles of dried herbs that have hung above the fire all season. She crumbles them carefully into a cloth bag to use for cooking and medicine. Their scent fills the room: rosemary, thyme, sage, the same plants that once guarded the family from illness. The circle feels complete. The father brings in a small branch budding with green. He places it by the window where the light touches it. The children stare at it as though it were a miracle. After months of gray and white, that tiny patch of color feels almost unreal. You understand why so many old stories worship the first signs of spring as proof that life can always return from cold and silence. An old English rhyme, recorded by travelers, said, "When green breaks through the snow, the fire bows low." It meant that once warmth came from the sun again, the hearth could rest. You can feel that shift in the room now. The family still keeps their fire, but it no longer rules their lives. It is smaller, gentler, almost symbolic, a reminder of what they endured and what they preserved. As evening falls, the air outside hums faintly with thawing water. The sound is soft but constant, like the earth breathing again. Inside the fire flickers lazily, the flames reflected in the eyes of those who once depended on it completely. There is peace now, but also gratitude. Every ember is a memory of struggle and every warm breath a promise of survival fulfilled. The mother hums again while stirring a pot of soup and her voice blends with the soft hiss of melting snow outside. The father leans back watching her. The children fall asleep one by one, cheeks flushed with heat and health. The fire glows low, and you can almost feel its warmth turn from necessity into nostalgia. The season has changed and yet the lessons remain. Comfort is not a constant gift. It is something built, tended and shared. As the final light of day fades across the floor, you realize that even in this quiet moment, the world is preparing to begin again. The snow has vanished completely now, leaving the earth dark and wet beneath your boots. Small shoots of green rise timidly from the soil, trembling in the cool wind. The air is still crisp, but it carries a softness that was missing before. It smells of water and woods, smoke of beginnings. The long season of survival is ending. In the cottage, the family moves easily through their morning. The father sharpens his tools near the door, humming a song that echoes faintly over the fields. The mother kneads dough on the table, her sleeves rolled to her elbows. The children chase each other in and out of the room, their laughter spilling through the open doorway. The fire burns, small and steady, content now to be a friend rather than a guardian. A new rhythm has taken hold. Where once the family's life revolved around keeping the cold away, now it turns toward growth and preparation. Historical writings from memorial accounts often describe this as the quiet season before planting, when people cleaned, mended and gave thanks for surviving the frost. Every gesture, every movement carries relief. The father steps outside to check the sky. Clouds drift slowly, touched with pale gold. He runs his fingers through the soil still damp but no longer frozen. You can almost feel the weight of his hope as he tests it, looking for signs that the earth is ready to wake. His eyes soften when he sees worms moving again beneath the surface. The land is alive inside. The mother stirs the pot hanging above the fire. The smell of onions, barley and herbs fills the air richer now than in the hunger months. There is more food to spare, and the family eats with gratitude. They have passed through the season of scarcity and into abundance, not through miracle but through endurance. A curious entry from an old agricultural record describes how villagers marked the end of winter by carrying live embers from their homes to the fields. They would bury a few beneath the soil to teach the earth warmth again. The act was half prayer, half poetry, a way to bind human effort to nature's renewal. You can imagine the faint smoke rising from the ground, carrying the memory of every hearth that had survived the dark months. Scholars sometimes argue about how conscious peasants were of this deep connection to the world around them. Did they think of themselves as part of the rhythm of the earth or merely as its servants? Watching this family, it feels clear that both are true. They live within the balance of necessity and wonder, understanding instinctively that every act of warmth given to the land returns one way or another to those who tend it. The children help gather the last of the firewood, stacking it neatly near the wall. It will dry through the summer for use next winter. The father smiles as he watches them. Every stick they lift carries a lesson. The work of today becomes the comfort of tomorrow. The cycle never ends, only changes shape. Later in the day, the family walks together toward the fields. The ground squelches underfoot, but no one minds. The sun feels stronger now, warm enough to melt the frost still hiding in shaded corners. The sky opens wide and clear, pale blue and endless. The family stops for a moment, standing in silence, letting the warmth touch their faces. For the first time in months, they do not flinch from the air. They welcome it. A small, curious custom in some rural villages involved whispering blessings to the first green shoots of spring. The words were simple: grow well and feed us kindly. The same could be said of life itself. The peasants understood that their existence depended not on control but on harmony with fire, with soil, with one another. The family returns home at sunset. The cottage stands quiet, its thatch gleaming faintly in the evening light. Inside, the fire burns low content. It no longer needs to roar. The world outside has taken back its share of warmth. The mother hums a tune as she folds away winter blankets. The father sits by the hearth, hands clasped, eyes soft with thought. The children fall asleep quickly, curled together beneath the thin but now unnecessary layers of wool. You look around the small room one last time. The stone hearth, the soot, dark beams, the bundles of herbs above the fire. Each piece of the home tells a story of labor, patience and faith. This place has survived the cold through nothing but the will of the people who live in it. The fire that once burned fiercely now glows gently, as if it too is resting after long work. Outside, the stars appear softer now. Against the warming sky, the night feels calm, not cruel. A dog barks in the distance, a faint breeze carries the scent of wet soil. The world has turned and life has endured. You realize, then, that central heating, for all its comfort, could never give what this family has built. Their warmth is not mechanical, it is human. It is the sum of small efforts, repeated endlessly, of love stitched into fabric and flame. It is the kind of warmth that lingers long after the fire goes out. The father stands and looks into the hearth one last time before sleep. He smiles satisfied and whispers, a line you almost miss. Let it rest. Now it's done its part. He turns away and the fire flickers low, the embers glowing like slow stars. The family sleeps, the air inside filled with quiet peace. Outside, spring stirs gently through the fields and dawn waits patient behind the hills. You sit in silence now, letting the rhythm of this world slow your thoughts. The fire has burned to ash and the night outside glows faintly, with the promise of spring. You imagine the family breathing softly in their sleep, the faint rise and fall of their chests in time with the rustle of the wind. The cottage stands small against the vastness of the season, yet it feels eternal, held together by warmth, faith and memory. Take a slow breath, feel how the air, cool but gentle, moves through you. Every breath in this story carries the same truth, that warmth is not something to be chased but something made. The peasants built it through their hands, their patience, their care for one another. They survived not by fighting the cold but by living alongside it. There is peace in that balance, wisdom shaped by centuries of endurance. The fire's glow fades in your mind, replaced by the faint shimmer of dawn. Somewhere a bird begins to sing its voice clear and bright, against the stillness. The song feels like an answer to every long night you have just walked through. Light has returned and with it rest. You can let your thoughts soften now. Picture the snow melting, the fields greening, the sky widening above the world. Imagine yourself inside that cottage feeling the last breath of winter slipping away. You are safe, you are warm, you are home. Now let that warmth settle deep inside you, quiet and steady. The story ends here, but its glow remains soft as embers beneath ash. Sleep well, dream of gentle, fire, light and remember the smallest flame is enough to hold back the dark. Sweet dreams.